Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Margaret O'Brien, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger for 12 years now, and in all that time, I've never seen anything I couldn't explain. Bears acting strange usually means someone's been feeding them. Weird sounds in the woods, wind through the rocks, or maybe a screech owl. People claiming they saw ghosts. Well, grief makes folks see all kinds of things that aren't really there. I grew up in Pittsburgh, but I came to these mountains right after college. Something about the Blue Ridge just called to me. The way the morning mist rolls through the valleys, how the leaves change colors like someone painted them by hand, it's peaceful here, or at least it used to be. It's September 1979, and the leaves are just starting to turn. This is my favorite time of year, cool nights, warm days, and the tourists are starting to thin out. Perfect weather for hiking, and the views from White Oak Canyon are something else. You can see ridge after ridge rolling away like waves on the ocean. I work in the Limberlost Trail area, up around 3,500 feet. It's beautiful country, but it's got a sad history. Back in the 1932, when they made this into a national park, the government forced all the mountain families to leave their homes. These people had been here for generations, some since the 1800s. They had to pack up everything they owned and go find new places to live in towns they'd never seen. You can still see where they used to live, if you know what to look for. Stone foundations scattered through the woods, old root cellars dug into hillsides, apple trees growing wild where someone's orchard used to be. Makes you wonder about all the lives that got uprooted, all the stories that got lost. I've always been good with kids, maybe because I understand how scary it can be to feel lost and alone. When I was 16, my little brother Danny drowned in the river behind our house. I was supposed to be watching him, but I got distracted talking to some friends. By the time I realized he wasn't playing in the yard anymore, it was too late. That's part of why I became a ranger, I think. To make sure families stay safe, to make sure nobody else has to lose someone they love. Most of my job is pretty routine. I check on campers, make sure people stay on the trails, help out when someone gets hurt. I carry a first aid kit and one of those big Motorola radios that can reach the ranger station 15 miles away. I know these mountains better than anybody. Every trail and creek and rocky outcrop. But lately, something's been off. It started about a month ago with the reports. Visitors saying they saw children playing near the old homestead foundations. Always the same story. Kids in old-fashioned clothes, playing games like hopscotch and tag. But when the visitors tried to get closer, the children would disappear. At first, I figured it was just local kids from down in the valley, maybe exploring where they shouldn't be. Kids love to play in the ruins of old houses. Or maybe it was people's imagination. When you're walking through these woods and you see a foundation where a family used to live, it's easy to picture children playing there. Then folks started finding things. Toys, mostly. Old wooden horses carved by hand, rag dolls with button eyes, little shoes made of leather. The kind of things children would have played with 50 years ago. But here's the strange part. They looked brand new. No rot, no fading, no bug damage. Like someone had just left them there yesterday. I started keeping track of where people found these items. Always near the old home sites, always where children might have played, and always in places where toys shouldn't last a week in mountain weather, let alone 50 years. There's got to be a logical explanation, I told myself. Maybe someone was playing pranks, leaving old toys around to spook tourists. Or maybe some history buff was doing some kind of educational thing, showing what life was like for mountain families. But the logical explanations were getting harder to come by, especially after what happened to Mrs. Keene. Dorothy Keene was a nice lady from Richmond, maybe 70 years old, visiting with her daughter and grandkids. She came to my ranger station on a Tuesday morning, looking confused and a little shaken up. "Ranger O'Brien," she said, "I need to tell you something strange that happened yesterday." She'd been walking the trail with her family when her grandson ran ahead toward one of the old foundations. When she caught up to him, He was playing with 3 other children she'd never seen before. They were wearing clothes that looked like they came from an old photograph, simple dresses and overalls, bare feet even though the morning was cold. The funny thing is, Mrs. Keene said, they seemed to know me. They kept calling me Granny Dot and asking about my mama. My grandmother used to live up here before the park was made. These children somehow knew her name, knew stories about her that I'd never told anybody. When Mrs. Keene's daughter called for them to come back, the strange children just vanished. Not walked away, vanished, like they were never there at all. I know how this sounds, Mrs. Keene said. But I've lived a long time, and I know what I saw. I wrote up a report, but I didn't know what to make of it. Mrs. Keene seemed like a sensible person, not the type to make up stories or see things that weren't there. But children don't just appear and disappear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those toys, about Mrs. Keene's story, about all the families who used to live up here. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought was forming that I didn't want to face. What if the children people were seeing weren't local kids playing pranks? What if they were the children who never got to leave? The next morning, I decided to take a closer look at the area where Mrs. Keene had her encounter. I grabbed my radio, my first aid kit, and my camera, then headed up the Limberlost Trail toward the old Morrison homestead. The Morrison place sat in a little clearing about 2 miles from the main trail. All that's left now is the stone foundation and part of a chimney, but you can still see where they had their garden, where their barn used to stand. According to the park records, the Morrisons had 5 children when they were forced to leave in 1935. As I got closer to the foundation, I noticed the temperature dropping. That wasn't unusual. Mountain weather can change fast, and stone foundations tend to stay cool. But this felt different. The air itself seemed thick, like before a thunderstorm, except the sky was clear. Then I heard it. Laughter. Children's laughter, faint but clear, coming from somewhere near the old house site. I stopped walking and listened hard. The sound was definitely there, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It seemed to echo off the trees in a way that made no sense. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The laughter stopped immediately. The woods went completely quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing. Even the normal forest sounds had disappeared. I walked around the foundation, looking for any sign that kids had been playing there recently. That's when I found them. Footprints in the soft mud near where the front porch would have been. Small bare feet, child-sized, but the prints were crisp and clear like they'd been made minutes ago. I took pictures of the footprints, then followed the trail they made. The prints led from the foundation toward the woods, but after about 20 feet, they just stopped. Not like the children had stepped onto rocks or hard ground, the prints just ended in the middle of soft earth where there should have been more tracks. I was studying the spot where the footprints vanished when my radio started acting up. Instead of the normal static, I heard voices, faint, like they were coming from very far away, speaking in the old mountain dialect my grandmother used to use. "Mama? Mama? Where are you? We've been waiting so long." I nearly dropped the radio. I checked the frequency. It was set to the ranger station channel, but this wasn't coming from there. The voices sounded like children, scared and lost. "Hello?" I said into the radio. "Who is this? Where are you?" The voices stopped, replaced by normal static. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Radio signals bounce around these mountains in strange ways. Maybe I'd picked up some old recording, or maybe it was interference from somewhere else. But children calling for their mama? In 1,930 seconds mountain speech? I decided to head back and do some research. If something strange was happening up here, I needed to understand the history of this place better. Back at the ranger station, I pulled out the old files about the families who used to live in the area. Most of the records were basic. Names, dates they were forced to relocate, where they went afterward. But one file caught my attention. The Morrison family file had a handwritten note clipped to it. 3 children died during relocation process. Buried in family cemetery, on ridge above homestead. Graves unmarked. 3 children, the same number Mrs. Keene said she saw playing with her grandson. I kept reading. The Morrisons had been forced to leave in November 1935, but it was a harsh winter, and moving was difficult. The 3 youngest children, Billy, Sarah, and Emma, got sick during the move. They died of pneumonia and were buried in a small family cemetery before the rest of the family relocated. The cemetery was never officially moved when the park was created. According to the notes, the graves were supposed to be relocated to a proper cemetery down in the valley, but somehow they got overlooked. The children were still buried up on the ridge somewhere, their graves lost and forgotten. I sat back in my chair, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. 3 children died. 3 children were buried up there, and now people were seeing 3 children playing near their old home. As the sun set that evening, I found myself looking up toward the Morrison homestead. I'd always thought of myself as a practical person, someone who dealt in facts and evidence. Ghosts were just stories people told, usually when they were grieving or scared. But I couldn't explain away those footprints. I couldn't explain the voices on the radio or the toys that showed up in impossible places. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something up on that ridge was trying to get my attention. That night, I lay awake thinking about my brother Danny, about how I'd failed to protect him, how I'd been too late to save him, about how desperately I wished I could see him again, could tell him I was sorry. Maybe that's why I was so willing to believe Mrs. Keene's story. Maybe that's why I wanted to investigate instead of just writing it off as imagination. Or maybe I was starting to understand that some things in these mountains couldn't be explained by practical thinking. Around midnight, I got out of bed and looked out my window toward the ridge. For just a moment, I thought I saw lights moving through the trees up there. Small lights, like children carrying lanterns. But when I blinked, they were gone. The next few days brought more reports, and they were getting harder to ignore. A family from Ohio said their 8-year-old daughter had spent an entire afternoon playing with the mountain children near the old Hartwell place. When they asked her about it, she said the children had taught her games she'd never heard of before. How to make corn husk dolls, how to play a singing game called Green Grow the Rushes. They told me their names, the little girl said. Billy and Sarah and Emma. They said they've been waiting for their mama and daddy to come back, but it's been a real long time. Billy, Sarah, and Emma Morrison, the children who died during the relocation. Another family reported finding their 6-year-old son talking to empty air near the old cemetery site. When they asked who he was talking to, he said, "The sad children. They want me to help them find their way home." But the report that really got my attention came from Tom Willis, a ranger who'd been working these mountains for 15 years. Tom wasn't the kind of man who spooked easily or made up stories. "Maggie," he said, "I think we've got a real problem up there." Tom had been doing a routine trail check near the Morrison place when he heard children crying, not playing or laughing, crying like their hearts were broken. He followed the sound to the old cemetery site, where he found something that made his blood run cold. The graves were open, not dug up by animals or vandals. The earth had been pushed up from underneath, like something had been trying to get out. 3 small holes in the ground, each about the size of a child's coffin, and around each hole, scattered like they'd been dropped in haste, were the toys people had been finding. Wooden horses, rag dolls, little leather shoes. "I've seen a lot of strange things in these mountains," Tom said, "but I've never seen anything like this. Those children have been dead for 44 years, Maggie. What could make their graves open up like that?" I knew I had to see it for myself. The next morning, I hiked up to the cemetery site with my camera and notebook. What Tom had described was even worse in person. The 3 graves formed a small triangle on a flat spot near the ridge top. The holes weren't messy like they would be if animals had dug them up. The earth was piled neatly beside each opening, like someone had carefully excavated from the inside. I took pictures, then climbed down into one of the holes to get a better look. The hole was about 4 feet deep and perfectly child-sized. At the bottom, I found fragments of rotted wood that must have been the coffin, and something else that made my hands shake. A small metal locket on a chain, the kind a little girl might wear. When I opened it, I found a photograph of a man and woman I didn't recognize, and engraved on the inside, "To Sarah, with love, Mama and Daddy." Sarah Morrison, one of the 3 children who died during the relocation. As I climbed out of the grave, I felt the temperature drop again, just like it had at the homestead. But this time, it got cold fast. Cold enough that I could see my breath in the September air. That's when I heard them. Voices, coming from the woods around the cemetery. Children's voices, speaking in that old mountain dialect. "She found our things, Billy. She's looking for us. Maybe she can help us go home. Mama said she'd come back for us. Maybe this lady knows where Mama went." I spun around, trying to see where the voices were coming from, but the woods looked empty. just trees and shadows and the normal sounds of the forest. "Hello," I called out. "Billy? Sarah? Emma? I'm here to help." The voices stopped immediately, just like they had when I'd tried to answer them on the radio. I waited for a long time, but nothing else happened. Finally, I gathered up the locket and the other items I'd found and headed back down the mountain. That evening, I called the County Historical Society to learn more about the Morrison family. The woman who answered, Mrs. Patterson, had grown up in the valley and remembered some of the old stories. "Oh yes, the Morrison children," she said sadly. "That was such a tragedy. The parents tried to come back for them, you know. After they got settled in their new place down in Harrisonburg, they wanted to bring the children down to a proper cemetery. But by the time they made it back up the mountain, winter had set in hard. They couldn't find the graves under all the snow." "What happened to the parents?" I asked. "They died just a few years later. Broken hearts," people said. "They never got over leaving those babies up there alone." The whole family was scattered after that. The surviving children went to live with different relatives. Far as I know, there's no family left who even remembers where those graves are. No family left, no one to come looking for them, no one to tell them it was okay to rest. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those 3 little children, buried on a cold mountain ridge, waiting 44 years for their parents to come back. Waiting for someone to take them home. I thought about Danny too, about how I'd give anything to tell him I was sorry, to make sure he knew I loved him. About how some kinds of love and guilt are strong enough to last forever. Around midnight, I decided to go back up to the ridge. I don't know what I was planning to do. Exactly. Maybe just sit with them for a while, so they wouldn't be alone. I grabbed my flashlight and headed up the trail in the dark. The moon was almost full, bright enough that I could see the path clearly. But as I got closer to the cemetery, my flashlight started flickering, then went out completely. I stopped to change the batteries, and that's when I saw them. 3 small figures standing near the open graves. Children, just like Mrs. Keene and the other visitors had described. A boy and 2 girls, wearing simple clothes from the 1932nd. They were glowing faintly in the moonlight, like they were lit from within. They saw me at the same time I saw them. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the smallest girl, who must have been Emma, stepped forward. "Are you our mama?" she asked in a voice like wind through autumn leaves. My heart nearly broke. "No, sweetie," I said gently, "but I'm here to help you. I know you've been waiting a long time." The boy Billy shook his head. "Mama said she'd come back. We've been waiting right here like she told us. We've been waiting so long." Sarah, the girl with the locket I'd found, started to cry. "We can't find our way home," she said. "Everything looks different now. Where did our house go? Where did everybody go?" I realized then what was happening. These children had been waiting for 44 years. But they didn't understand that time had passed. They didn't know their parents had died. They didn't even know they were dead themselves. They were lost, confused, and scared. And they'd been alone all this time. "I'm going to help you," I promised them. "I'm going to help you find your way home." But even as I said it, I wondered how you help the dead find peace. And I wondered what price I might have to pay to set them free. Over the next week, I researched everything I could about the Morrison family and mountain burial customs. What I learned made me understand why the children were still trapped on the ridge. According to mountain tradition, the dead couldn't rest until their family officially sent them home with proper funeral rites. When someone died, the family would hold a ceremony to release the spirit and give permission for them to pass on to whatever came next. But the Morrison children had been buried in haste during a harsh winter. Their parents had planned to come back and do things properly, but they died before they could return. The children were stuck in a kind of spiritual limbo, waiting for permission that would never come. I also learned something that chilled me to the bone. The children weren't just appearing to random visitors anymore. They were getting stronger, more solid, and they were focusing their attention on modern children, especially kids who were visiting the park with their families. 3 separate families reported that their children had gone missing for hours, only to be found playing with invisible friends near the old home sites. The kids would come back acting strange, speaking in old-fashioned mountain dialect, knowing songs and games from the 1932nd, talking about wanting to stay in the mountains forever. It was like the ghost children were trying to recruit companions, other kids who might stay with them and help them feel less alone. The situation reached a crisis point on a Thursday night in late September. A family camping near White Oak Canyon called for emergency help. Their 3 children, ages 6, 8, and 10, had vanished from their campsite sometime after midnight. I joined the search party at dawn. We found the missing children just before noon, in the old root cellar behind the Morrison homestead. They were alive but barely responsive, huddled together in the cold stone chamber like they were hibernating. But here's the terrifying part. They looked different. Pallor, thinner, like something had been draining the life out of them. And when we tried to wake them up, they spoke in that old mountain dialect, asking for their mountain friends and begging not to be taken away from the ridge. It took hours to get them warm and alert enough to come down the mountain. Their parents were frantic, demanding to know what had happened to their kids. I couldn't tell them the truth. How do you explain that their children had almost been claimed by the spirits of 3 kids who died 44 years ago? That night, after the family had been taken to the hospital for observation, I knew I had to end this. The Morrison children were getting desperate, and desperate ghosts are dangerous ghosts. If I didn't help them find peace soon, they might succeed in keeping the next group of children who wandered into their territory. I drove up to see Reverend Jackson, an old mountain preacher who lived down in the valley. His family had been in these mountains for generations, and if anyone knew how to handle restless spirits, it would be him. Reverend Jackson was a small, weathered man in his 70s, with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly when he poured coffee. He listened to my story without interrupting, nodding like he'd heard similar tales before. "The Morrison children," he said finally. "I remember when they died. Terrible, sad thing. Their mama used to bring them to our church when they could make it down the mountain." "Can you help them?" I asked. "Can you help them find peace?" He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. "Maybe," he said. "But it won't be easy. Those children have been holding on for almost 50 years. They're not going to want to let go." "What do I need to do?" "You'll need to go to them at dawn," he said. "Dawn is when the boundary between this world and the next is thinnest. You'll need to speak for their family, since there's no blood relatives left. Tell them their parents loved them, that they're not abandoned, that it's okay to go home." "That's it?" Reverend Jackson's expression grew serious. "No, child, that's just the beginning. They're going to fight you. They've been alone so long, they'll be terrified of leaving. They might try to take you with them to make you their permanent guardian. You'll need to be stronger than their fear and loneliness. You'll need to be willing to pay whatever price it takes to set them free." "What kind of price?" "I don't know," he said softly. "But the dead don't give up easy, and children, even dead ones, can be powerful when they're scared." I left Reverend Jackson's house knowing what I had to do, even though I was terrified. Those 3 children had been trapped for 44 years, getting lonelier and more desperate every day. If I didn't help them, they'd eventually succeed in claiming some modern children to keep them company. I couldn't let that happen. Dawn was at 6:47 the next morning. I set my alarm for 5:30 and tried to get some sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Billy and Sarah and Emma standing by their open graves, holding out their hands and asking me to stay with them forever. At 6:30, I hiked up to the cemetery in the pre-dawn darkness. The moon had set and the stars were fading, leaving the world caught between night and day. The air was so still, I could hear my own heartbeat. The children were waiting for me. All 3 of them stood beside their graves, but they looked different now, more solid, more real, but also somehow wrong. Their eyes reflected the faint starlight like an animal's eyes, and when they moved, they left trails of cold mist in the air. "You came back," Emma said, and her voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "We knew you would," Billy added. "You understand us. You lost someone too." Sarah stepped closer, and I could feel the cold radiating from her small body. "Stay with us," she pleaded. "We don't want to be alone anymore. We could be a family." I felt the pull of their loneliness, their desperate need for connection. Part of me wanted to stay, wanted to comfort them, wanted to make up for all the years they'd spent waiting. But I thought about those modern children in the hospital, about how close they'd come to being claimed forever. I thought about all the other families who might visit these mountains, all the other children who might be targeted. "I can't stay," I said gently, "but I can help you go home." The 3 children moved closer, surrounding me in a circle. The temperature dropped so fast that frost started forming on the grass around my feet. "We don't want to go home," Billy said, and his voice was no longer that of a confused little boy. It was ancient, hollow, filled with 44 years of loneliness and rage. "We want to stay here. We want friends who won't leave us. Test those we have DM type. Your parents loved you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They never wanted to abandon you. They tried to come back, but they couldn't find your graves in the snow. They died still loving you, still wanting to bring you home." "Lies," Sarah hissed. "Everyone leaves. Everyone forgets. But if we keep some children here with us, they can't leave. They can't forget." The 3 children joined hands around me, and I felt something trying to grab hold of my soul, trying to pull me down into their cold, lonely world. For a moment, I almost gave in. It would be so easy to stay, to never have to feel guilty about Danny again, to never have to worry about protecting anyone else. But then I thought about why I'd become a ranger in the first place. Not to hide from responsibility, but to make sure other families stayed safe. "Billy Morrison," I said loudly, "your mama and daddy loved you. Sarah Morrison, you were cherished. Emma Morrison, you were wanted. It's time to go home. It's time to rest." The children's grip on my soul tightened, and I felt myself getting weaker, colder, more distant from the living world. "Please," Emma whispered, and she sounded like a lost little girl again. "Please don't make us go alone. We've been alone so long." I looked at her small, pale face, at the desperate hope in her eyes, and I almost broke. But then the first light of dawn touched the ridge, and I knew it was time. "You won't be alone," I promised. "You're going to your parents. They're waiting for you." As the sun rose over the mountains, I spoke the words Reverend Jackson had taught me, the old mountain blessing for sending spirits home. The 3 children began to glow brighter, and for a moment they looked like living children again, warm and solid and real. "Tell them we love them," Sarah whispered as the light grew brighter around them. "Tell them we weren't angry about leaving," Billy added. "Tell them we understand," Emma said softly. And then they were gone, fading into the morning light like mist before the sun. The silence that followed was different from any quiet I'd ever heard in these mountains. It wasn't the heavy, waiting silence that had hung over the ridge for weeks. It was peaceful, like the whole mountainside had finally let out a breath it had been holding for 44 years. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun rise over the endless ridges of the Blue Ridge. The 3 graves were still open, but they looked different now, empty in the way they should be, not like something was missing from them. As I walked back down the trail, I noticed changes everywhere. The temperature felt normal again. Birds were singing near the old homestead sites for the first time in weeks. Even the light seemed different, warmer, and more natural. Over the next few days, the reports stopped coming in. No more sightings of children in old-fashioned clothes. No more toys appearing in impossible places. No more voices on the radio or strange cold spots in the woods. The 3 families whose children had been affected all called to tell me their kids were back to normal. The children remembered playing with mountain friends, but the memories seemed distant now, like something from a dream they could barely recall. I filed my final report on the incidents, listing everything as resolved, no further action required. I didn't mention the supernatural elements, of course. The official record just says that the missing items were likely planted by pranksters who stopped their activities after increased ranger patrols. But the unofficial record, the one I keep in my own private files, tells the real story. 3 children who died during one of the darkest chapters in these mountains' history finally found peace. 3 little spirits who had been trapped by love and loss and bureaucratic neglect finally went home to their parents. A month later, I convinced the Park Service to install a small memorial at the cemetery site. Just a simple stone marker that reads, "In memory of the children who called these mountains home." It doesn't mention names or dates, but people who visit seem to understand its significance. I often find small toys and flowers left there, offerings from families who somehow sense the sadness this place once held. I've changed too, in ways I'm still figuring out. I'm not as quick to dismiss the stories people tell me about strange experiences in the mountains. I've learned that grief and love can be powerful forces, strong enough to hold on to souls long after their bodies are gone. And I've learned that sometimes the most important part of a ranger's job isn't protecting people from the dangers they can see, but helping them make peace with the ones they can't. I still think about Danny sometimes, but the guilt doesn't eat at me the way it used to. Helping Billy and Sarah and Emma find their way home somehow helped me understand that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form. These mountains are old, and they hold a lot of stories. Some of them are happy stories about families building lives in beautiful places. Some of them are sad stories about people being forced to leave the only home they'd ever known. And some of them are about children who got lost along the way, who needed someone to help them find the path back to the people who loved them. I'm proud that I got to be part of that last kind of story. I'm proud that Billy and Sarah and Emma Morrison don't have to wait alone on the ridge anymore. But sometimes, when the moon is full and the mist rolls through the valleys, I swear I can still hear children laughing in these woods. Not the sad, hollow laughter of lost spirits, but the joyful sound of kids at play. Maybe it's just my imagination. Maybe it's the echo of all the children who lived and played in these mountains over the centuries. Or maybe it's Billy and Sarah and Emma, finally free to be children again, playing in whatever beautiful place their parents found for them on the other side of the darkness. I hope it's the last one. After waiting 44 years to go home, they deserve to play. My name is Jimmy Whitaker, and I've been a ranger in these North Carolina mountains for 15 years now. My daddy worked these peaks before me, and his daddy before him. We've been watching over Mount Mitchell for 3 generations. At 6,684 feet, she's the tallest mountain east of the Mississippi, and she can be meaner than a wet cat when the weather turns. People always ask me about the stories. The Cherokee won't even say the mountain's real name out loud. They call it Crying Stone and cross themselves when they have to talk about it. Tourists love that kind of stuff, eating up every ghost story and legend like candy. Me? I've always been practical. Mountain wind makes all kinds of noises when it hits the rock faces just right. Sound carries funny at altitude, tricks your ear into hearing things that aren't there. It was November 15th, 1985, when everything I thought I knew got turned upside down. The call came in at 5:30 a.m. 3 different climbing parties, spread out across the mountain, all reporting the same thing. Around 3:17 inches the morning, they'd heard screaming. Not human screaming, something else. Something that made grown men pack up their gear in the dark and hike down dangerous trails rather than spend another minute on that mountain. Sounded like a dying animal, said the first caller, a guy named Pete from Charlotte. His voice shook even over the radio, but bigger, much bigger. Lasted about 47 seconds, then just stopped. The second group told the exact same story. Same time, same duration, same bone-deep fear in their voices. The third call clinched it. Experienced climbers don't abandon expensive gear and flee in the middle of the night unless something's really wrong. I grabbed my pack and headed up the mountain before dawn. The weather was turning nasty, with heavy clouds rolling in from the west and wind that cut right through your jacket. First snow of the season was coming, and anybody caught above the tree line would be in serious trouble. My radio crackled as I hiked the main trail. "Jimmy, this is base. You copy?" "I copy, Sarah. What have you got?" "Weather service says wind speeds hitting 50 miles per hour at the summit. Visibility near zero with the fog. You sure you want to go up there?" I stopped and checked my altimeter. Already at 5,200 feet, and the weird part was just starting to hit me. Usually by this elevation, you'd see squirrels, maybe hear a few birds. The forest was dead silent. Even the wind seemed muffled, like the mountain was holding its breath. "I'll be careful," I told Sarah. "Something's got these climbers spooked bad enough to leave behind $1,000 worth of gear." "I need to know what." The first piece of equipment I found was a brand new climbing harness, still clipped to a rope that disappeared over a ledge. The rope was cut clean, not frayed like it would be if someone fell. Cut with a knife, like someone needed to get free fast. I followed the trail of abandoned gear up toward the 6,000-foot mark. Backpacks, sleeping bags, even a pair of expensive boots, all left behind like people had just vanished. But there were no footprints leading away from the gear. With the soft earth from yesterday's rain, there should have been tracks everywhere. That's when I heard it for the first time. A low sound that seemed to come from the rock itself. Not quite a moan, not quite a whistle. It made my teeth ache and set my nerves on edge. The sound every animal in these mountains had learned to fear. I radioed down to base and asked Sarah to contact Tom Crow Feather, the the Cherokee elder who sometimes helped us with cultural issues. If anyone knew what was really going on with this mountain, it would be him. While I waited, I set up my equipment. I had recording devices, infrared cameras, even a seismograph to detect ground vibrations. 15 years of ranger work had taught me to document everything, especially when it didn't make sense. Tom arrived just before sunset, moving up that trail like a man half his age. He took one look at the abandoned gear and shook his head. "You shouldn't be here, Jimmy," he said quietly. "Not tonight. Tonight is the death moon. Come on, Tom. You know I respect your traditions, but I've got people scared out of their minds. I need facts, not stories." Tom picked up one of the abandoned backpacks and turned it over in his weathered hands. "Your people don't listen. This mountain has rules. Break them, and the guardians wake up." "What guardians?" "The ones who've been protecting this place since before your people came." "Since before my people came, if the old stories are true." Tom's eyes grew distant. "Something happened here 42 years ago. Something that disturbed the balance. Every year since then, on this exact night, the mountain cries out." I wanted to argue, but the look in Tom's eyes stopped me. This wasn't superstition talking, this was fear. As darkness fell, I positioned myself at a small clearing around 5,800 feet. My equipment was running, radios were charged, and I had enough supplies to last until morning. Whatever was scaring people off this mountain, I was going to record it. The temperature dropped fast after sunset. By midnight, my breath came out in white puffs, and frost was forming on my gear. The wind died down to almost nothing, leaving an unnatural quiet that made every small sound seem loud as a gunshot. At 3:15 a.m., my radio started crackling with static. Then my infrared camera went crazy, showing heat signatures that didn't match anything I'd ever seen. Large shapes moving across the rock faces, but when I looked with my eyes, there was nothing there. Then, at exactly 3:17, the screaming started. It wasn't one voice, it was several, all crying out together in perfect harmony. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the rocks beneath my feet and the air above my head. It was pain and loss and desperate need all rolled into one awful noise that made my bones vibrate. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound went right through them. It was inside my head now, inside my chest, making my heart skip beats. The screaming went on, exactly 47 seconds, then cut off like someone had thrown a switch. In the sudden silence that followed, I heard something else, the distant sound of aircraft engines, growing closer. I looked up into the cloudy sky and saw lights. Not modern aircraft lights. These were dimmer, yellowish, like the landing lights on an old plane. They moved in a slow circle around the mountain peak, then faded away. My hands were shaking as I checked my recording equipment. Every single device had failed at exactly 3:17. The tapes were blank. The digital readouts showed nothing but error messages. It was like whatever had happened existed outside the normal rules of physics. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. When dawn broke, I hiked back down to base camp with more questions than answers. But I knew one thing for certain now. Something was living on this mountain. Something that didn't want to be recorded or measured or explained away. The next day, I drove to the county library and started digging through old newspaper archives. If Tom was right about something happening 42 years ago, there should be records. I found it in a 1943 issue of the Asheville Citizen-Times. A small article buried on page 3, Military Training Aircraft Missing in Mountains. A B-25 bomber on a night navigation exercise had disappeared somewhere in the Mount Mitchell area. The plane carried a crew of 5 and was never found. The crash date was November 15, 1943, exactly 42 years ago. I drove back up to the mountain that afternoon with a sick feeling in my stomach. The missing bomber explained the engine sounds, but it didn't explain the screaming, or why every piece of electronic equipment failed when the phenomenon started. I wasn't the only one looking for answers. A team of researchers from Duke University had arrived with equipment that made my gear look like toys. Dr. Sarah Chen, a geophysicist, was setting up sensors all over the mountain. "We're reading electromagnetic anomalies off the charts," she told me as I helped her position a detector at the 6,000-foot level. "Whatever's happening here is generating massive electrical fields. What could cause that? Nothing natural. These readings are impossible under normal conditions." She frowned at her instruments. It's like the mountain itself is electrically charged. That night, I positioned myself even closer to the summit, at 6,200 feet. Tom had tried to talk me out of it, warning that the Guardians were getting angry, but I needed to see what was really happening up there. I wasn't alone. Dr. Chen had researchers scattered across the mountain, all linked by radio. We were going to document this thing properly. At 3:15, the electromagnetic readings went crazy. Doctor, Chen's voice crackled over the radio. Jimmy, we're seeing impossible energy spikes, temperatures dropping 30 degrees in 60 seconds. This isn't natural weather. Then the screaming started again. But this time, I was close enough to see where it was coming from. Ghostly figures stood on the rocky peak above me. 5 men in 1,940 seconds flight gear, their faces pale in the moonlight. They were screaming, calling out in desperation, hands cupped around their mouths like they were trying to signal for help. Behind them, moving in slow circles around the peak, was the shadow of a twin-engine bomber. I could see right through it, but it cast a real shadow on the rocks below. The pilot was trying to land, coming in again and again, but something was stopping him. Other figures had appeared on the surrounding peaks. Tall men with long black hair and war paint, carrying weapons that glowed with blue fire. They were shouting back at the airmen, driving them away from the sacred mountain. The ghostly bomber pilot saw me watching and pointed desperately at the peak. His mouth moved, but all I could hear was the horrible screaming that seemed to come from the mountain itself. After exactly 47 seconds, all the figures faded away. The temperature returned to normal, and my radio crackled back to life. Jimmy, Dr. Chen's voice was shaky. Did you see that? Please tell me someone else saw that. Over the radio, voices started checking in. Every researcher on the mountain had witnessed the same impossible scene. We had electromagnetic readings, temperature data, and seismic measurements. But all the recording equipment had failed again. Whatever was happening on Mount Mitchell, it was real. And it was getting stronger. I spent the next day researching the B-25 crash. In the National Archives, I found the full military report. The bomber was on a night navigation training mission when it disappeared. The crew consisted of 5 young airmen, all in their early 20s. They were never found, and the wreckage was never recovered. But the most chilling detail was in the final radio transmission. At 3:17 a.m. on November 15th, 1943, the pilot had radioed. Something's wrong. The mountain. It's screaming at us. That evening, Tom Crowfeather came to see me at the ranger station. You're planning to go back up there tonight, he said. It wasn't a question. I have to. Those airmen are trapped up there, and something's keeping them from finding peace. Tom nodded slowly. The Guardians protect our sacred places, but sometimes protection becomes a prison. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather pouch. My grandfather gave this to me. He said it would be needed someday. What is it? Medicine bundle. Sacred items for speaking with the dead. You'll need it if you want to help those lost souls find their way home. I took the pouch, feeling the weight of small objects inside. Tom, what really happened up there? The mountain is sacred to my people, has been for 1,000 years. When the white soldiers came with their flying machine, they violated that sacred space. The Guardians rose up to defend it, but the airmen were just boys doing their duty. Neither side understood the other. So they've been trapped in that moment for 42 years? Time works differently for spirits. To them, the crash just happened. They're still trying to complete their mission, and the Guardians are still trying to protect the mountain. Every year, they fight the same battle. That night, I climbed to the summit alone. The weather was clear for once, with a full moon that lit up the rocky peak like a spotlight. I could feel the electromagnetic buildup starting early, making my skin tingle and my hair stand on end. At 3:15, they appeared again, the 5 airmen on the peak, screaming for help, the Cherokee Guardians on the surrounding peaks, shouting warnings in their ancient language, and circling overhead, the ghostly B-25 bomber, its pilot desperately trying to find a safe place to land. This time, I walked toward them. The pilot saw me coming and pointed frantically at his instruments. Through some kind of supernatural communication, I understood what he was trying to say. Their navigation equipment had failed. They were lost in the clouds and running out of fuel. They just wanted to land safely and complete their mission. But every time they tried to land, the Cherokee Guardians drove them back. The warriors saw only invaders violating their sacred space, not scared young men in trouble. I pulled out Tom's medicine bundle and held it high. The guardians stopped their shouting and looked at me with surprise. One of them, taller than the rest with eagle feathers in his hair, stepped forward. Somehow, I found the words, "These men are lost. They don't mean to dishonor your sacred place, they just want to go home." The guardian leader looked from me to the airmen, then back to the medicine bundle in my hands. He spoke in Cherokee, and though I didn't understand the words, I felt their meaning. "Why do you speak for the Sky Warriors?" "Because someone has to. They've been trapped here for 42 years. Their families never knew what happened to them. The war they were training for ended decades ago. They've suffered enough." The guardian considered this, then nodded slowly. He raised his glowing weapon and spoke again. This time, the airmen heard him too. The pilot's eyes went wide as he finally understood. He looked at his crew, then at the Cherokee warriors, then down at the rocky peak he'd been trying to reach for over 4 decades. With a final salute to the guardians, the pilot pulled back on his controls. The ghostly bomber climbed away from the mountain, heading east toward the horizon. As it disappeared into the moonlight, the 5 airmen on the peak faded away as well. The Cherokee guardians watched them go, then turned to me. The leader nodded once in approval, before disappearing with his warriors into the mountain mists. For the first time in 42 years, Mount Mitchell was quiet at 3:17 a.m. The silence felt strange after all those years of screaming. I sat on the summit until dawn, partly to make sure the phenomenon was really over, partly because I needed time to process what I'd witnessed. When I hiked down to base camp, Dr. Chen was waiting with her equipment readings from the night before. The electromagnetic spikes stopped at exactly 3:17, she said, showing me the data. Temperature returned to normal immediately. Whatever was causing the anomaly, it's gone. I filed my official report as a successful resolution of acoustic disturbance complaints. The real story went into my personal files, along with Tom's medicine bundle and everything I'd learned about the 1943 crash. The Army was surprisingly cooperative when I contacted them about recovering the bomber wreckage. They'd been looking for that plane for over 40 years. A team of investigators arrived within a week, and using the coordinates from my encounters, they found the crash site at 6,200 feet. The wreckage was exactly where the ghostly pilot had been trying to land. The fuselage was cracked open, but the remains of all 5 crew members were still inside, along with their personal effects and the plane's navigation equipment. They were buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. I attended the service and met some of their surviving family members. Nieces, nephews, even a few siblings who had wondered their whole lives what happened to their loved ones. Tom Crow Feather performed a Cherokee blessing ceremony at the crash site, officially recognizing the airmen as honored dead rather than invaders. A small memorial plaque now marks the spot, and the Cherokee Nation maintains it as a place of respect for all warriors, regardless of tribe. I still work Mount Mitchell, but my job has changed. Word gets around in the Ranger Network about unusual incidents, and I've become the guy they call when something doesn't fit the normal explanations. I've helped resolve 3 similar cases in other parts of Appalachia, always involving sacred sites and trapped spirits. The mountain is peaceful now. Wildlife has returned to normal patterns above the tree line, and November full moons bring clear, calm weather instead of supernatural storms. The climbing parties that camp up there report nothing more unusual than beautiful starry skies and the ordinary sounds of wind through rock. But sometimes, on very clear nights when the moon is full, pilots flying over the area report seeing the lights of an old bomber heading east toward home. It's always peaceful now, though not desperate or lost. Just 5 young airmen finally completing their mission. I keep Tom's medicine bundle in my ranger station, and I've learned enough Cherokee to properly respect the mountain's sacred nature. Some places demand more than just protection, they demand understanding. And every November 15th, I climb to the summit and spend a quiet moment at the memorial, listening to the wind and remembering that not all hauntings are about fear. Sometimes they're just about finding the way home. My name is Samuel Fletcher, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a forest ranger for 19 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia mountains had to offer. Bears, wildcats, the occasional lost hiker who thinks they can handle the wilderness with nothing but sneakers and a granola bar. After Vietnam and losing my wife Sarah to cancer 3 years back, I figured the worst surprises were behind me. I was wrong. It was February 1988, one of the coldest winters I'd ever seen in the George Washington National Forest. Snow lay 3 feet deep in most places, 4 feet in the drifts. The temperature hadn't climbed above 0 in 2 weeks. Most folks had the good sense to stay home by their fires, which is how I liked it. My cabin in Bone Hollow sits 25 miles from the nearest town, 15 miles from my closest neighbor. When you've buried your wife and watched too many good men die in a jungle on the other side of the world, sometimes you need that kind of quiet. Bone Hollow got its name from the buffalo bones early settlers found scattered through the valley. Cherokee used to drive whole herds through the gap between the ridges when they hunted. Of course, that was before we whites showed up and drove off both the buffalo and the Cherokee. Now it's just me, the trees, and whatever animals are tough enough to make it through winter this far up. I was checking my weather station readings that Tuesday morning when Jake Morrison's pickup came grinding up the logging road, chains clanking against his wheel wells. Jake's been hunting these mountains for 30 years. He's not the type to spook easy, which is why the look on his face when he climbed out of that truck made me pay attention. "Sam, you got a minute?" Jake called out, his breath making white clouds in the bitter air. "Got something I need to tell you about." I poured coffee from my thermos and handed him the cup. Jake's hands were shaking, and not just from cold. "Me and the boys were up on the North Ridge yesterday," he said, warming his fingers around the hot metal. "You know that clearing where the old logging road dead ends?" I knew it. Steep country, thick timber, the kind of place where you could walk in circles for hours if you didn't know your way. "We were tracking that 8-point buck Charlie wounded last week," Jake continued, following blood sign through the snow. "That's when we saw them." "Saw what?" Jake looked me right in the eye. "Footprints, Sam. Biggest damn footprints I ever saw. Bare feet, looked almost human, but..." He shook his head. "Thing that made those tracks had to be 9 feet tall, maybe more." I'd heard stories like this before. City folks come up here expecting to see Bigfoot behind every tree. But Jake wasn't some weekend warrior from Charleston. This man could track a deer through solid rock if he had to. "How big were these prints?" I asked. 18 inches long, easy. 6 feet between steps." Jake pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "Drew you a picture. Toes looked almost like fingers, if you can believe that. And Sam," his voice dropped low, "whatever made those tracks, it was watching us, could feel eyes on us the whole time." I studied Jake's rough sketch. The proportions were all wrong for a bear. Too narrow, too long, and Jake was right about those toes. They looked like they could grab things. "Could have been a bear walking on his hind legs," I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. Jake shook his head hard. 20 years I've been hunting these mountains, Sam. I know what bear sign looks like. This was something else, something that don't belong up here." After Jake left, I sat in my cabin looking at that drawing. Outside, wind howled through the bare branches like something dying. The rational part of my mind, the part trained by the Army and 19 years of Forest Service, said Jake and his boys had seen a bear and let their imaginations run wild. But another part of me, the part that learned to trust gut feelings in Vietnam, wasn't so sure. Something about the way Jake's hands shook when he handed me that sketch, something about how quiet the forest had been lately. I'd noticed it but hadn't really thought about it until now. No bird calls in the morning, no rabbit tracks around my cabin, no deer sign near the creek. It was like something had scared all the wildlife away from Bone Hollow. I loaded fresh batteries into my camera and checked my 30 to 06. Come morning, I was going to take a snowshoe hike up to that North Ridge and see what Jake Morrison and his hunting party had really found. In 19 years of ranging these mountains, I'd built a reputation for having logical explanations for everything. Bears getting into campsites, strange sounds in the night, even the occasional ghost light some hikers reported seeing. There was always a reason that made sense if you looked hard enough. But as I fell asleep that night, listening to wind tear through the hollow, I had the uncomfortable feeling that my comfortable world of logical explanations was about to get a lot more complicated. Dawn came gray, and bitter, with fresh snow falling in fat, lazy flakes. I strapped on my snowshoes and headed up toward the North Ridge, following the old logging road that hadn't seen traffic since the 1960 seconds. My breath formed ice crystals on my beard, and every step squeaked in the dry snow. The climb took me 2 hours, partly because of the deep snow, and partly because I kept stopping to look for any sign of what Jake had described. Normal winter woods should show tracks everywhere: mice, rabbits, maybe a fox or two. But the snow around me was empty as a blank page. I found Jake's hunting spot easily enough. 4 sets of boot prints where they'd stood in a cluster, cigarette butts in the snow, the unmistakable yellow stain where someone had relieved himself against a tree. From there, I could follow their path as they'd tracked the wounded deer. That's where I found the first footprint. Jake hadn't exaggerated. The thing was enormous, pressed deep into snow that came up past my knees. I knelt down with my measuring tape, trying to process what I was seeing. 18.5 inches long, nearly 7 inches wide at the ball of the foot, 5 toes that looked more like thick fingers, each one ending in what might have been a claw mark. I took photos from every angle, then made a plaster cast. The detail that came out in the plaster made my hands shake worse than Jake's had. Skin ridges, like fingerprints but bigger. This wasn't some hoax or misidentified bear paw. Something with skin had made this track. The trail led deeper into the forest, following the natural contour of the ridge. Each footprint was perfectly spaced, 6-foot strides that would have been impossible for any human to make. Whatever this creature was, it moved through snow that would have left me floundering like it was walking on dry ground. A 1/4 mile from Jake's hunting spot, I found where the story got really disturbing. The deer was still there, or what was left of it, an 8-point buck, just like Jake had said, but it hadn't died from any gunshot wound. The animal had been torn apart with bare hands, or claws. Ribs cracked open, spine snapped clean through. But here's what made my ranger training kick into overdrive. There were no feeding marks. Whatever killed this deer hadn't eaten it. It had just killed it and left it to freeze. That's when I heard the sound. Low, rumbling, like a diesel engine idling in the distance. But there were no roads up here, no machinery for miles. The sound seemed to come from all around me, echoing off the ridge walls until I couldn't tell which direction it originated from. I unslung my rifle and waited. The sound came again, closer this time, and now I could tell it wasn't mechanical. It was organic, alive, like the world's biggest dog growling deep in its chest. My military training kicked in: scan the area, identify threats, find cover. But there was nowhere to hide on that exposed ridgeline, and whatever was making that sound could see me just fine. The growling stopped. Forest went dead, quiet, not even wind in the trees. That's when I noticed the smell. Thick, musky, like a wet animal but stronger. Like a zoo on a hot summer day. I turned in a slow circle, rifle ready, eyes scanning the tree line. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards away, standing at the edge of a thick stand of hemlocks, was the biggest living thing I'd ever seen outside of a zoo. 9 feet tall, maybe more, covered head to toe in dark brown hair. Massive shoulders, arms that hung down past its knees, and a face that was almost human but not quite. It was looking right at me. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but probably lasted 10 seconds. Its eyes were intelligent, curious, not the blank stare of an animal. More like it was studying me, trying to figure out what I was doing in its territory. I had my rifle trained on center mass, finger on the trigger, but something held me back from shooting. Maybe it was the way it stood there, not threatening, just watching. Or maybe it was the realization that if I missed, or if one shot didn't drop it, I was dead. The creature tilted its head like a dog hearing a strange sound. Then, without any warning, it stepped backward into the hemlocks and vanished. Didn't crash through the underbrush like you'd expect from something that size. Just melted away into the forest like morning mist. I stood there for 5 more minutes, heart hammering, rifle still raised. When I was finally convinced it was gone, I walked over to where it had been standing. The footprints in the snow matched my plaster cast perfectly. I followed the trail for another 100 yards, but the tracks led into a section of forest so thick I couldn't push through with snowshoes. Whatever this thing was, it knew terrain I couldn't navigate. The hike back to my cabin took an hour, but felt like 10 minutes. My mind was spinning. trying to process what I'd seen. 19 years of training told me to report this, call in wildlife management, maybe even contact the state university. But something else told me that whatever lived up on that ridge, it had chosen to let me walk away. And I wasn't sure how it would feel about a bunch of scientists tramping through its home. That night I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the photographs and plaster cast. The evidence was right there in front of me, proof that something impossible was living in these mountains. But proof of what? Some unknown species of primate? A surviving line of prehistoric man? Or something else entirely? Outside my cabin window, the forest felt different now. Less empty. More like something was out there watching, waiting. Every shadow could be hiding 9 feet of muscle and claws. Every sound could be those massive feet moving through snow. I loaded extra shells into my rifle and made sure the cabin door was locked tight. For the first time in 19 years of ranging these mountains, I felt like prey. I didn't sleep much that night. Every wind gust, every branch cracking in the cold had me reaching for my rifle. Come morning, I decided to drive into town and talk to someone who might have answers that didn't involve calling in the federal government. Joseph Strongbear lived in a trailer park outside Marlinton, but everyone in 3 counties knew him as the man to see about Cherokee history. He was pushing 80, with gray braids and hands that shook from arthritis, but his mind was sharp as ever. "You're talking about Kekle Kudla," Joseph said after I'd shown him the photos and plaster cast. We were sitting in his tiny kitchen, drinking coffee that could strip paint. Forest Guardian. Haven't heard that name spoken in years. Forest Guardian? Joseph nodded slowly. My grandmother told me stories, said Kekle Kudla appears when the forest is threatened, when the balance between man and nature gets disturbed, takes physical form during times of great need. You're talking about it like it's real. Son, I'm Cherokee. Everything's real until proven otherwise. Joseph leaned forward, studying my photographs. See, white folks always want to put things in boxes. Real or not real, natural or supernatural. Cherokee, don't think that way. We know the forest has spirits, guardians that protect the animals and the land itself. But what is it? Some kind of animal? Maybe something more. Joseph set down his coffee cup. My great-grandfather saw one during the winter of 1889. Terrible winter, animals starving, white settlers shooting everything that moved. He said Kekle Kudla appeared to drive the hunters away, protect what was left of the wildlife. I thought about the dead deer I'd found, torn apart but not eaten. This thing killed a deer. Doesn't sound like much of a protector. Did it eat the deer? No. Then maybe it was sending a message. Maybe those hunters were taking too much. Joseph stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the mountains. Been a lot of changes up there lately. Heard talk of logging operations, mining surveys. Maybe Kekle Kudla doesn't like what he sees. I drove back to Bone Hollow with more questions than answers, but at least now I had a name for what I'd encountered. Whether that made things better or worse remained to be seen. That afternoon, I set up trail cameras at 3 locations along the creature's path. Motion-activated, infrared-capable, the kind we use to monitor bear activity. If this thing was real and not some stress-induced hallucination, I'd have proof by morning. Just after sunset, sitting in my cabin, updating my patrol logs, I heard something outside. Not the growling from before, but a rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the cabin door, just a crack. The tapping was coming from the side of the building, near my woodpile. I could see fresh tracks in the snow, the same massive footprints from the ridge. The creature had come to me. I stepped outside, rifle in one hand, flashlight in the other. The beam cut through falling snow, casting weird shadows between the trees. The tapping had stopped, but I could smell that musky odor again, stronger now. "I know you're out there," I called softly. "What do you want?" A shape moved between 2 pine trees, just at the edge of my flashlight beam. Tall, broad, covered in hair. It stepped into the light for just a moment, long enough for me to see it clearly. The face was the worst part, almost human, but stretched and distorted like a reflection in funhouse mirror, intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through me. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth, not fangs, just big square teeth like a person's. It made a sound, halfway between a grunt and a word. Then it pointed past my cabin, toward the old logging road that led out of the hollow. I followed its gesture with my flashlight, and saw tire tracks in the snow, fresh tracks, made after the snowfall had stopped. Someone had driven up that road during the day while I was in town. The creature looked at me again, made the same pointing gesture, then stepped back into the darkness. I heard its footsteps moving away, but didn't see it go. I spent the next hour checking those tire tracks by flashlight. Heavy-duty truck, probably a logging vehicle. The tracks led to a turnaround spot about a mile up the road, where someone had gotten out and walked around for a while. Boot prints, cigarette butts, and something else that made my blood run cold. Survey stakes. Little orange flags marking trees, the kind logging companies use to identify timber stands. Someone was planning to cut trees in Bone Hollow. My hollow. Federal land that was supposed to be protected. When I checked my trail cameras the next morning, they were gone. Not damaged, not broken, just gone, as if something had carefully removed them from their mounts. I found all 3 cameras stacked neatly on a tree stump 50 yards away. The memory cards were still inside, but they showed only white static. That evening, the creature came back. This time I was ready. I'd left food outside, jerky, apples, some of the cornbread Sarah used to make from a recipe I still remembered. When I heard the now familiar sound of footsteps in snow, I opened the door and stepped onto my porch. "I left something for you," I said quietly. The creature stood at the edge of my yard, just barely visible in the moonlight. It approached the food slowly, cautiously, then picked up the jerky and sniffed it. After a moment, it ate the meat and took the apples, but left the cornbread untouched. When it finished eating, the creature walked to the edge of my porch and set something down in the snow. Then it stepped back and waited. I climbed down to see what it had left. 3 stones, each one perfectly round and smooth, like river rocks, but different somehow. They were warm to the touch despite sitting in snow, and they had strange markings carved into their surface. When I looked up, the creature was gone. I spent that night sitting by my window, turning those stones over in my hands. Whatever this thing was, it was trying to communicate. The survey stakes, the warning about the tire tracks. Now this gift exchange, it wasn't just some mindless animal defending territory. It was intelligent, aware, and it was trying to tell me something. The question was whether I was smart enough to understand before it was too late. Outside, snow kept falling, and somewhere in the darkness of Bone Hollow, something that shouldn't exist was watching over a forest that men in expensive suits had decided to destroy. 3 days later, they came with chainsaws. I was checking my morning weather readings when I heard the diesel engines grinding up the logging road. Not one truck this time, but a whole convoy. Logging trucks, a supervisor's pickup, even a security vehicle with 2 men who looked more like soldiers than forestry workers. The lead truck bore the logo of Appalachian Timber Syndicate, a company I'd never heard of, but that apparently had permits to cut trees on federal land. Permits that shouldn't exist, but there they were, signed and official looking. I tried to explain about the protected status of Bone Hollow, about the wildlife surveys that needed to be completed first, about proper environmental impact procedures. The crew supervisor, a thick-set man named Crawford, just smiled and showed me a court order overriding all my objections. "Federal judge says we cut, Crawford said, chewing on an unlit cigar. "You got problems with that, take it up with Washington." The security guards were the ones that really worried me. They carried themselves like ex-military, and they watched me with the flat, professional stare of men who'd been paid to make problems disappear. When I radioed my district supervisor to report the situation, I was told to cooperate fully and stay out of the way. Someone with serious money and political connections wanted these trees cut, and they weren't about to let one forest ranger stop them. The cutting started that afternoon. I watched from my cabin as they began taking down the old-growth hemlocks near the creek, trees that had been standing when Cherokee still hunted buffalo through this valley. Each falling giant shook the ground hard enough to rattle my windows. As the sun went down and the crew headed back to town, I walked through the devastation. Stumps where mighty trees had stood that morning, branches and sawdust scattered like battlefield debris. The creek was already running muddy from disturbed soil. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. The creature stood in the center of the cutting zone, surrounded by the wreckage of its forest home. In the fading light, it looked bigger than before, more solid somehow, as if grief and rage were giving it substance. When it saw me, it made a sound I'd never heard before. Not a growl, but something closer to a moan of pain. It walked over to one of the biggest stumps, knelt down, and placed both massive hands on the cut surface. I swear I could feel something pass between them, some kind of connection that went deeper than anything I understood. When it looked up at me, its eyes were no longer curious. They were full of an intelligence that burned with purpose and fury. I tried to stop them, I said quietly. I don't have enough authority. The creature stood and pointed toward the road where the logging trucks had disappeared. Then it looked back at me and made a gesture I couldn't misinterpret. It drew one clawed finger across its throat. The killing was about to begin. I spent that night trying to contact everyone I could think of. Environmental groups, wildlife protection agencies, even the FBI. But the permits were legitimate, backed by federal authority I couldn't challenge. As far as the law was concerned, Appalachian Timber Syndicate had every right to clear-cut Bone Hollow. The law wasn't going to help. The creature and I were on our own. The logging crew returned at dawn, ready for another day of destruction. But something had changed overnight. Their chainsaws wouldn't start. Every one of them flooded or fouled beyond repair. The logging trucks developed mysterious hydraulic leaks that left them sitting useless in puddles of red fluid. Crawford blamed sabotage and called in the security guards, but there was no sign of human interference. The equipment had simply failed, all at once, as if the forest itself was fighting back. "Fix it," Crawford shouted at his mechanics. "I don't care what it takes, get this gear running." While they worked on the machines, I noticed something else. The remaining wildlife was leaving. I watched deer, rabbits, even the winter birds streaming out of the hollow in a steady exodus. They seemed to know what was coming. By noon, the crew had the chainsaws running again. By 12:30, 3 loggers had been injured in separate accidents. A falling branch, a chainsaw malfunction, a slip on mysteriously icy ground. Crawford sent them to the hospital and brought in replacements. At 2 p.m., one of the security guards spotted the creature. "Contact! Contact!" he shouted into his radio, drawing a high-powered rifle. Unknown hostile, approximately 9 feet tall, moving through the tree line. I tried to tell them to hold fire. That shooting would only make things worse, but they weren't listening to me anymore. The guards had orders to protect the operation from all threats, and they decided the creature qualified. The first shot echoed through the hollow like thunder. I saw bark explode from a tree where the creature had been standing, but it was already gone, moving through the forest with impossible silence. More shots followed, the security team trying to track something they could barely see. The creature was playing with them, appearing for just a moment at the edge of their vision, then vanishing before they could get a clean shot. The logging crew had stopped work and taken cover behind their trucks. These were men who worked dangerous jobs in remote places, but what they were seeing now was beyond their experience. "What the hell is that thing?" one of them shouted. Crawford was screaming into his radio, demanding backup, more guards, maybe even military support. But I could hear in his voice that he was starting to realize the truth. Whatever they'd disturbed in this forest was beyond the power of guns and money to control. That's when the real attack began. The creature came out of the forest like a force of nature, not hiding anymore, not playing games. 9.5 feet of muscle and fury, moving faster than anything that size had a right to move. The security guards opened fire, but their shots went wild as they scrambled to track something that could leap 20 feet between trees. One guard went down, not shot but swatted aside by a massive hand that sent him flying into a tree trunk. The second guard emptied his magazine, then fumbled to reload as the creature closed distance between them. I found myself running toward the confrontation, rifle in hand, though I wasn't sure who I was planning to shoot. The creature that was defending its home, or the men who were destroying it? The decision was made for me when Crawford pulled a pistol and aimed it at my chest. "You did this," he snarled. "You sabotaged our equipment, brought that thing down on us." "I didn't bring anything," I said, keeping my rifle pointed at the ground. "You did this when you decided to cut protected forest." "Protected?" Crawford laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Son, there ain't no protection where there's enough money involved. We got permits to clear every tree in this valley, and we're gonna do it even if we have to kill every animal and burn every blade of grass." That's when I understood. This wasn't about timber rights or legal permits. Someone wanted Bone Hollow stripped bare. Wanted whatever lived here, driven away or destroyed. The logging was just an excuse. Crawford's finger tightened on his trigger, but he never got the chance to fire. The creature appeared behind him like a shadow come to life, one massive hand closing over the man's skull. Crawford's eyes went wide, his mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out. The creature looked at me over Crawford's head, and I saw something in its expression that might have been a question. Justice or mercy? Death or exile? My choice. Let him live, I said quietly, but make sure he understands the message. The creature squeezed just enough to crack the plastic hard hat, then released Crawford, who collapsed in the snow like a discarded puppet. The other loggers were already running for their trucks, dragging their injured companions, abandoning equipment that had cost more than most people made in a year. In 5 minutes, Bone Hollow was quiet again, except for the sound of diesel engines fading into the distance. The creature turned to me, and for the first time since this all began, I saw something like gratitude in those intelligent eyes. It reached into the thick hair, covering its chest, and pulled out something that glinted in the afternoon light. A badge. A forest ranger badge, old and tarnished, with a name I couldn't quite make out. It held the badge out to me, and I understood. I wasn't the first ranger to encounter Keklakudla. I wasn't the first to make this choice between duty and conscience. I took the badge, heavy and warm in my palm, and nodded. The creature stepped back, raised one massive hand in what might have been a salute or a blessing, then melted back into the forest it had died to protect. The cleanup took 3 days. Federal investigators arrived within hours of Crawford's terrified phone calls, followed by environmental protection agents, FBI, and finally, a team of scientists who asked very specific questions about unidentified wildlife activity. Nobody mentioned the word Bigfoot, but they took detailed measurements of every footprint and confiscated all the abandoned logging equipment. Crawford and his crew stuck to their story about a large, aggressive bear that had defended its territory with unusual intelligence. The security guards were less diplomatic, describing a bipedal humanoid entity demonstrating strategic thinking and coordinated assault capabilities. Their report was immediately classified. Appalachian Timber Syndicate's permits were revoked, pending an environmental impact investigation that would likely take years to complete. The company folded within a month, its corporate officers pleading ignorance about how they'd obtained authorization to log protected federal land. I kept my job, even got a commendation for exceptional dedication to forest preservation in the face of illegitimate commercial pressure. Nobody asked too many questions about exactly how I'd convinced armed loggers to abandon a $1 million operation. The old ranger badge now sits on my mantle next to Sarah's picture. I had it researched through Forest Service records. It belonged to Thomas Whitehorse, a Cherokee ranger who disappeared in these mountains during the winter of 1934. His body was never found, but his final report mentioned unusual wildlife requiring special protection protocols. Bone Hollow healed faster than anyone expected. Within a month, deer trails reappeared through the snow. Birds returned to nest in the surviving trees. The creek ran clear again, and wildlife population surveys showed numbers higher than they'd been in decades. I still patrol these mountains, but my routes have changed. I make sure to check the upper ridges regularly, not for poachers or lost hikers, but to maintain what Joseph Strongbear would call respectful contact with the forest's true guardian. Sometimes I find gifts on my morning patrols, stones arranged in careful patterns, branches woven into symbols. I'm slowly learning to read. Once a deer hide scraped clean and soft as velvet. I leave gifts in return, jerky, apples, tools that might be useful to something living wild in the mountains. I never see the creature directly anymore, but I know it's there. When logging trucks appear on distant roads, they develop mysterious mechanical problems. When mining surveyors venture too deep into protected areas, they report equipment failures and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The forest has a protector, and that protector has learned to trust at least one human being. My reports to Forest Service headquarters are models of professional discretion. Unusual predator activity requiring enhanced protection protocols. Unconfirmed large mammal species demonstrating advanced territorial behavior. The bureaucrats in Washington don't ask for details, as long as the preserve stays protected and no loggers get eaten. Joseph Strongbear died last spring, peacefully in his sleep. but not before teaching me more Cherokee words than any government manual ever contained. Keklakudla doesn't just mean forest guardian. It means the one who remembers what we've forgotten. I understand now. The creature isn't just protecting trees and animals. It's protecting the idea that some places should remain wild, that not everything in this world exists for human exploitation. It remembers what these mountains were like before we came, and it's determined to keep at least this one valley the way it was meant to be. On cold winter nights, when snow falls deep in Bone Hollow, I sometimes hear sounds that don't match any animal in the field guides. A voice calling across the ridges, ancient and patient, reminding the forest that it's still protected, still safe. And sometimes, just sometimes, that voice sounds almost human. 3 years have passed since Crawford and his crew ran screaming from these mountains. The official investigation concluded with recommendations for enhanced environmental protection protocols and improved interagency communication regarding sensitive ecological zones. The scientific team's final report was marked "Need to Know Only" and filed somewhere I'll never see it. But I know what they found, because I helped them find it. Footprint casts, hair samples, territorial markings that suggested an unknown primate species displaying exceptional intelligence and environmental adaptation. Evidence that something extraordinary lives in these mountains, something that deserves protection rather than exploitation. Federal funding for Bone Hollow preservation increased by 400%. The hollow is now designated as critical habitat for endangered native species, pending formal classification. No logging, no mining, no development of any kind without environmental impact studies that could take decades to complete. The creature got exactly what it wanted, a guarantee that its home would stay wild. I got something I didn't expect, a purpose bigger than just watching trees and filing reports. I'm not just a forest ranger anymore. I'm a guardian's partner, a bridge between the human world and something far older and wiser than bureaucracy or commerce. Tomorrow I start training my replacement for the day when age forces me to retire from active duty. I've been careful in my selection. Someone with military experience, someone who understands both duty and conscience, someone who can keep secrets and make hard choices, someone who might be worthy of earning the trust of Kekle Kudle, guardian of Bone Hollow, protector of the wild places where spirits still walk among the trees. The mountains will be in good hands. My name is Franklin Caldwell, but folks around here just call me Frank. I've been walking these mountains for 17 years now as a park ranger, and I thought I'd seen everything the Smokies had to offer. Bears, lost hikers, drunk hunters who think they're Daniel Boone, you name it, I've dealt with it. My grandfather used to tell stories about these mountains when I was a kid. Strange stories about hungry spirits and Cherokee curses. Back then, I figured it was just mountain folk trying to scare city people away from their favorite fishing spots. I was wrong about a lot of things. It was October 1983 when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the mountainsides in reds and golds that would make a postcard jealous. I was stationed at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, working out of the Cades Cove area. At 44, I'd been through enough to know that most supernatural events had perfectly normal explanations. Lost hikers got turned around in the fog. Strange sounds were just elk or wild boar. And those old Cherokee stories? Well, poverty makes people see things that aren't there. The morning it all started, I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when the call came in. A family of 5 from Ohio, the Hendersons, had been reported missing. Last seen 3 days ago at Abrams Falls, about 15 miles into the backcountry. The person who called it in was another camper who'd found their site. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The temperature was dropping fast, maybe down to 35 at night. If the family was still out there, exposure would kill them before anything else did. I'd done hundreds of search and rescue operations, but something felt different about this one. Maybe it was the way the birds had gone quiet, or how my radio kept picking up static that sounded almost like whispers. The Henderson campsite was exactly where the caller said it would be, tucked into a grove of ancient hemlocks near Cataract Falls. What I found there made my stomach turn cold. Their breakfast was still cooking on the camp stove, eggs burned black in the pan, coffee pot still warm. Sleeping bags laid out neat as you please, like they'd just stepped away for a minute and planned to come right back. But they'd been gone for 3 days. I called it in on my Motorola HT220, though the signal was weak this deep in the mountains. Control, this is Caldwell. Found the Henderson camp. Looks like they left in a hurry. Maybe spooked by something. The response crackled back through heavy static. Copy that, Frank. Any sign of animal activity? I looked around the camp again, noting details I'd been trained to spot. No scattered food containers. No torn fabric. No blood. Whatever had made them leave, it hadn't been a bear or mountain lion. Those critters would have torn the place apart looking for food. Negative on animals, I radioed back, but I found tracks leading into the brush. Gonna follow and see where they go. That's when I made my first mistake. I should have waited for backup. The tracks were easy enough to follow at first. 5 sets of footprints in the soft earth near the creek, 2 adults and 3 kids, just like the missing family. But as I followed them away from the campsite, something strange happened. The trail led straight into the thickest part of the rhododendron forest, where no sensible person would go. No marked trails, no clearings, just dense brush that would tear you up something fierce. The footprints showed they'd been running, long strides, deep impressions in the mud. The children's tracks disappeared entirely after about 200 yards, like they'd just vanished into thin air. But the adult tracks kept going, deeper into the mountain. I followed for another quarter mile before I noticed how quiet everything had gotten. No birdsong, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects had gone silent. In 17 years of walking these mountains, I'd never experienced quiet like that. It wasn't natural. My compass started acting up around then, the needle spinning like it couldn't decide which way was north. I tapped it a few times, figuring it was just interference from the limestone caves that honeycombed this part of the mountain. But the needle kept spinning, and my radio was nothing but static now. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since I'd entered the brush, which didn't make sense. October in the Smokies was usually mild during the day. But here, in this tangle of rhododendron, my breath was starting to fog. That's when I found the backpack. It was hanging about 12 feet up in an old oak tree, shredded like something had used it for a scratching post. But no bear I knew could reach that high. And the claw marks in the bark were wrong somehow. Too long, too deep, and they seemed to spiral around the trunk in a pattern that hurt to look at too long. I managed to get the pack down with a long branch. Inside was a wallet with an Ohio driver's license, ECTO, Robert Henderson, 38 years old. The photo showed a smiling man with his arm around a woman and 3 kids, normal family. Normal people who should have been safe on a normal camping trip. But normal families don't just disappear into the deepest parts of the mountains. And they sure don't leave their stuff hanging in trees like some kind of twisted Christmas ornament. I was about to head back for reinforcements when I heard the sound that changed everything. It was a voice, faint but clear, calling from somewhere deeper in the forest. "Help us, please, someone help us." It sounded like a little girl. Every instinct I'd developed in 17 years told me to turn around and get back up. But that voice, scared and small and desperate, cut right through my training. If there was even a chance one of the Henderson kids was alive out there, I had to try. "I'm coming," I shouted back. "Keep calling so I can find you." The voice came again, but from a different direction this time. Then another voice, an adult man. "Over here, we're trapped." I followed the sounds deeper into the brush, pushing through thorns that grabbed at my uniform like skeletal fingers. The voices kept calling, always just ahead, always just out of reach. But something was bothering me about them. They sounded clear, like the people were right next to me, but I could never see anyone. After about 10 minutes of fighting through the underbrush, I came to a limestone outcropping with a dark opening at its base. A cave entrance, maybe 4 feet high and half hidden by hanging moss. The voices were coming from inside. "Hello," I called out. "This is Park Ranger Frank Caldwell. Are you hurt?" "Down here," came the reply. "We fell through a hole, can't get out." I clicked on my flashlight and peered into the cave mouth. The beam seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness, not reaching nearly as far as it should. But I could see boot prints in the mud near the entrance and what looked like fabric caught on the rocks. Protocol said to wait for backup and proper cave rescue equipment. But those voices sounded so frightened, so desperate. How could I live with myself if someone died while I was waiting for the cavalry? I squeezed through the cave entrance, calling out to let them know I was coming. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, and my flashlight beam showed smooth limestone walls that had been carved by water over thousands of years. The air smelled wrong, not the clean mineral scent you'd expect in a cave, but something organic and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. "Keep talking," I yelled. "I'm following your voices." But the voices had stopped. I stood in the darkness, listening to my own breathing echo off the walls. My flashlight beam showed the tunnel branching off in 2 directions ahead. No sign of the Henderson family. No response to my calls. That's when I noticed the bones. They were scattered along the cave floor like someone had been having a picnic down here. At first I thought they might be from animals, deer, maybe, or wild pigs. But as I got closer, I saw they were too big, too human. Some still had fragments of clothing attached. My hand started shaking as I picked up what was clearly a child's sneaker, still laced tight. Inside was a small foot bone. On the sole, I could just make out faded cartoon characters. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were coming from deeper in the cave, echoing off the limestone walls. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone walking carefully in the dark. But the sound was wrong somehow. Too heavy. Too long. Like whatever was making them had feet bigger than any human should. "Hello?" I called out, though every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run. "Henderson family? Is that you?" The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. My flashlight beam trembled as I pointed it down the tunnel toward the sound. Nothing but empty limestone and shadows that seemed to move just outside the light. Then I heard the voice again. The little girl, crying now, "Please help me. Mister, I'm scared. It's so cold down here." But this time, I could tell the voice was coming from behind me. Back toward the entrance, I spun around, my light cutting through the darkness, and saw something that made my blood freeze. There was a figure standing at the cave entrance. Small, child-sized, silhouetted against the dim light from outside. But the silhouette was wrong. The arms hung too long, almost to the ground, and when it moved, it seemed to flow rather than walk, like smoke given shape. "Come, help me," it said in that same little girl's voice. But now I could hear something else underneath the words. Something hungry. I ran. I don't remember much about getting out of that cave, just the feeling of panic clawing at my chest and the sound of something large moving behind me in the darkness. My flashlight died halfway to the entrance, leaving me to feel my way along the limestone walls with trembling fingers. When I finally burst out into daylight, I kept running until I reached the Henderson campsite. Only then did I stop to catch my breath and try to make sense of what I'd seen. It had to be shock, I told myself. Finding those bones, being alone in the dark, it was enough to make anyone's imagination run wild. The figure at the cave entrance was probably just shadows playing tricks with my eyes. The voices could have been echoes from other caves, carried on underground air currents. But when I looked back toward the limestone outcropping, I could see something moving in the shadows around the cave entrance. Something that watched me watching it. I got on the radio and called for backup, though the static was so bad I could barely make myself understood. "Control, this is Caldwell. I need immediate assistance at the Henderson site. Found evidence of casualties. And I need someone who knows about cave rescue." What I didn't tell them was that I was pretty sure the Henderson family wasn't lost anymore. I was pretty sure they'd been found by something else. Deputy Ranger Carol Henderson arrived 2 hours later with a 3-man search team and 2 tracking dogs. Carol was good people, 5 years younger than me, tougher than most men I knew, and smart enough to question everything. The dogs were German shepherds, trained for wilderness rescue, and they'd never failed to find a trail. Until today. "Show me what you found," Carol said, checking her equipment. She had the same radio I did, plus GPS gear, and enough rope to rappel down into hell if necessary. I led them back to the cave entrance, though I made sure we stayed in a tight group. In daylight, the limestone outcropping looked ordinary enough. Just another cave system in a mountain full of them. But the dogs wouldn't go near it. "What's wrong with them?" asked Tommy Martinez, one of the search team volunteers. He was trying to coax his dog, Rex, toward the cave mouth, but the animal was whimpering and backing away like it had been shocked. "Never seen anything like this," said the other handler, a grizzled old-timer named Pete Hawkins. "These dogs will track a scent through fire if they have to." But they won't even acknowledge there's a trail here. I showed Carol the bones I'd found inside. She examined them with the clinical eye of someone who'd seen her share of wilderness fatalities. These have been here a while, she said. Months, maybe years, but the clothing fragments look recent. There's something else, I said. I told her about the voices, though I left out the part about the figure at the cave entrance. No point in making her think I'd lost my mind. Carol listened without comment, then turned to the search team. Tommy, you and Pete set up a perimeter around this whole area. I want to know about every animal track, every broken branch, every footprint. Frank and I are going to explore this cave system. Ma'am, Pete said carefully, the dogs really don't want us near that place. In my experience, when animals act like that, there's usually a good reason. Noted, Carol replied. But we've got 5 missing people, and this is our only lead. We're going in, but we're going in smart. Full safety protocols. We rigged up a proper cave rescue setup with safety lines and backup lights. Carol had military-grade equipment that made my flashlight look like a birthday candle. But even with all our gear, something felt wrong about going back into that hole. The voices started again as soon as we entered the cave. "Help us," came the cry, echoing from deep in the limestone tunnels. "We're hurt, please help us." But this time, Carol heard them too. "Jesus," she breathed. "How far down do these caves go?" According to my topographic maps, this cave system was mostly unexplored. The limestone in this area was riddled with tunnels and chambers that connected to underground streams. Some of the passages went down 300 or 400 feet before hitting the water table. We followed the main tunnel, our safety rope playing out behind us. The voices kept calling, always from the next chamber, always just out of reach. But we were finding more evidence as we went deeper. Scraps of clothing, personal items, a child's toy, and more bones, lots more bones. "Frank," Carol said quietly, playing her light across a pile of remains in an alcove. "These aren't all from the Henderson family. Look at the clothing. Some of this stuff is old, really old." She was right. Mixed in with modern camping gear were fragments of different clothing. Work shirts that looked like they were from the 1952, a woman's dress that might have been from the 1962, and underneath it all, older things. Much older. "How many people have gone missing in these mountains?" I asked. "More than we like to admit," Carol replied. "But most of them turn up eventually. Lost hikers, hunters who've had too much to drink, they wander out on their own after a few days." "What about the ones who don't turn up?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was thoughtful. "There've been stories, incidents, but nothing that couldn't be explained by natural causes. Bears, exposure, people falling into ravines. That's when we found the chamber. It opened up ahead of us like a cathedral, our lights barely reaching the ceiling. The floor was covered with what looked like arranged stones, but as we got closer, I realized they were bones, human bones, placed in careful patterns that hurt to look at directly. And painted on the walls, in what looked suspiciously like dried blood, were images, stick figures that seemed to move in our flashlight beams. Pictures of people being consumed by elongated shadows with 2 long arms and glowing eyes. "Cherokee," Carol said, studying the paintings. "But these aren't historical. The pigments are too fresh." The voices were louder in here, coming from multiple directions at once. Men, women, children, all calling for help in voices that sounded terrified and desperate. But now I could hear something else underneath the words. A wet, hungry sound, like something chewing. "Carol," I said, grabbing her arm, "we need to get out of here, right now." That's when our lights went out. Not died, went out. All at once, like someone had thrown a switch. Our backup lights, our headlamps, even the glow sticks we'd brought for emergencies. Everything electronic just stopped working. In the absolute darkness, the voices changed. They stopped sounding human. The crying became a long, keening wail that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The calls for help turned into something that might have been laughter, if laughter could sound like bones breaking. And underneath it all, I could hear something large moving in the chamber with us. "Frank?" Carol's voice was tight with fear. "Tell me you can see something. Anything." "No," I whispered back. "Stay close. Don't move." But even as I said it, I could feel something brush against my shoulder. Something cold and thin, like fingers made of ice. The air around us was getting colder by the second, And now I could smell that rotting meat odor I'd noticed before, but stronger, much stronger. In the darkness, Carol screamed. It was cut short, like something had clamped over her mouth. I heard a brief struggle, the sound of equipment hitting stone, and then nothing but that wet chewing sound and my own panicked breathing. "Carol!" I shouted, reaching out blindly. "Carol, where are you?" My hands found empty air. Then the safety rope, slack and cut. Then something wet on the cave floor that I didn't want to think about. I was alone in the darkness, with something that had taken my partner. And it was still hungry. I don't know how long I stood there in the dark, listening to sounds that no human should ever have to hear. It felt like hours, but it might have been minutes. Time gets strange when you're trapped underground with something that wants to eat you. When my vision finally started to adjust, I realized there was a faint light coming from somewhere deeper in the cave system. Not electric light, but a pale blue glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was just enough to make out shapes in the darkness. That's when I saw them. They were standing around me in a circle, maybe a dozen of them. At first glance, they looked human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head where it ought to be. But the proportions were all wrong. They were stretched out like someone had taken a person and pulled them on a rack until they were 8 or 9 feet tall. Their arms hung down almost to the ground, ending in fingers that were too long and tipped with what looked like bone. And their eyes glowed with that same pale blue light. One of them spoke, and I nearly lost my mind when I recognized the voice. It was Carol's voice, clear as day. "Frank, help me, I'm hurt, can't get out." But Carol was gone. I'd heard what happened to her in the dark. Another one spoke in a child's voice. "Mister, I'm scared. Please don't leave me here." Then an old man's voice. "Son, I've been waiting for you. Waiting such a long time." And I knew that voice. I'd been hearing it in my dreams for 32 years. "Dad?" The thing that had spoken in my father's voice tilted its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. When it smiled, I could see that its teeth were too sharp, and there were too many of them. "Hello, Franklin," it said. "I've been waiting for you to come home." My father had disappeared when I was 12 years old. Went out for a hunting trip in these same mountains and never came back. The search teams found his truck, found his campsite, but never found him. Mom always said he'd just run off, abandoned us like some men do. But I knew my dad. He wouldn't have left us, not willingly. Now I knew what had really happened to him. "You're not my father," I said, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "Aren't I?" the thing asked. "I have his memories, his voice, his love for you. What makes a man more than his memories, Franklin?" The others were moving closer now, that wet chewing sound coming from somewhere in their throats. I could see Carol's equipment scattered on the cave floor, along with things that had belonged to the Henderson family. And older things. Much older. The Cherokee who died in this valley, the thing continued. They were hungry when they died, so hungry, and hunger like that, it doesn't die with the body. It grows, it feeds, it learns. I noticed something then. Mixed in among the bones on the cave floor were modern items, ranger equipment, a badge that looked familiar. My badge, the one I'd lost 20 years ago when I was just a rookie ranger who'd gotten turned around in these mountains. I'd spent 3 days wandering in circles before finding my way out, with no memory of how I'd gotten lost or how I'd found the trail again. Except I hadn't found the trail, had I? "You let me go," I said, the pieces clicking together in my mind. "That time when I was young. You let me go. We sent you back," the thing said, "to bring others, to lead them to us when the time was right. You've been a very good shepherd, Franklin." I thought about all the search and rescue operations I'd led over the years. How many people had I guided into these mountains? How many had never made it home? I'd always been proud of my record, my success rate. But what if my success had been measured differently? The creatures were close enough now that I could smell them. That rotting meat smell was their breath. Their presence made the air so cold I could see my own breath, and the cave walls were starting to glisten with frost. "Join us," the thing with my father's voice said. "Join your family. We've been waiting so long." That's when I remembered something my grandfather had told me when I was small. A Cherokee prayer my great-grandmother had taught him, back when the mountain people still remembered the old ways. I started to speak the words, barely remembering the pronunciation. The creature stopped moving. The thing wearing my father's face snarled, showing those 2 sharp teeth. "Those words have no power here. This is our place now. But they did have power. I could feel it in the way the air warmed slightly, in how the pale blue glow flickered. I kept speaking the prayer, louder now, and the creatures began to back away. That's when Joseph Running Bear stepped out of the shadows. He was an old Cherokee man I'd met a few times at park events. Must have been 80 if he was a day, but he moved through the cave like he owned it. In his hands was a burning torch that gave off clean, white light. "The boy remembers," he said to the creatures. "His blood remembers what his mind forgot." The things that had been human once hissed and retreated further into the shadows. Joseph continued speaking, but in Cherokee now. Words I couldn't understand, but that made the cave walls ring like bells. "Come, Franklin Caldwell," he said to me. "Time to finish what your grandfather started." "My grandfather? What are you talking about?" "Your grandfather was one of the soldiers who drove my people from this land," Joseph said. "But he also helped some escape, saved many lives. The debt between our families has been a long time in the settling." He led me deeper into the cave system, the creatures following but not approaching. His torch seemed to keep them at bay. We walked for what felt like miles, through tunnels that twisted and turned in ways that didn't match any map I'd ever seen. Finally, we came to another chamber. This one was smaller, with a natural spring in the center. The water was clear and cold, and it reflected the torchlight like stars. "This is the heart," Joseph said, "where the curse began, where it can end." "What do I have to do?" "Your grandfather's blood runs in your veins. Cherokee blood too, though your family has forgotten. Speak the words, call the spirits home." He taught me the phrases, made me repeat them until I got the pronunciation right. And as I spoke them over the sacred spring, I felt something change in the cave around us. The creatures came then, all at once, rushing toward us with inhuman speed. But as my voice rose in the ancient prayer, they began to change too. The stretched, hungry things collapsed inward, becoming human-shaped again. I saw faces I recognized from missing person reports. I saw Carol, whole and unharmed. I saw the Henderson family, confused but alive. And I saw my father, looking exactly as he had the day he disappeared, 32 years ago. "I'm sorry, son," he said as the light began to fade from his eyes. "I tried to come home. I tried so hard. One by one, they all faded away. Not dying, but going somewhere else. Somewhere they should have gone a long time ago." The last thing I remembered was Joseph Running Bear, placing his hand on my forehead and speaking words in Cherokee. Then everything went dark. I woke up at sunrise, lying beside the spring with Joseph Running Bear sitting cross-legged nearby. The old man looked tired, older somehow than he had in the cave. "Is it over?" I asked. "For now," he said. "The hungry ones have gone to where they belong. The curse is broken, but scars remain, and scars have a way of reopening." I looked around the chamber, but it was different now. Smaller. Just a natural cave with a spring in it, nothing supernatural or threatening. The bone arrangements were gone. The blood paintings had faded to nothing. What happened to the people? The families who were taken? They were never truly taken, Joseph explained. Trapped, yes, used to lure others, but the dead cannot hold the living forever. They are free now. We made our way out of the cave system, and I was amazed to find it was just a short walk to the surface. The tunnels that had seemed to go on for miles in the dark were actually just a small network of connected chambers. My radio crackled to life as soon as we emerged. Frank, come in." It was Carol's voice, clear and worried. "I'm here," I replied. "I'm okay." "Where the hell have you been? You've been missing for 6 hours. We found your equipment at the cave entrance, but no sign of you." 6 hours. It had felt like days underground. I looked at Joseph, but the old man shook his head slightly. "Some truths are too heavy for official reports," he said quietly. "When the rescue team found us, I told them I'd gotten turned around in the cave system and hit my head. Mild concussion, temporary disorientation. It was a story everyone could accept. Carol was fine. Had no memory of entering the cave with me. According to her account, I'd gone in alone against protocol while she was setting up the perimeter. She'd been organizing a search party when my radio came back online. The Henderson family turned up 3 days later, walking out of the forest near Gatlinburg. They were dehydrated and confused, with no memory of the past week. The official report listed it as a case of mass disorientation caused by drinking contaminated water. The Park Service quietly installed new warning signs about natural toxins in mountain springs. The cave entrance was sealed with concrete a month later. Official reason: unstable geological conditions. But I know the real reason, and I know the sealing won't hold forever. I still work these mountains, though I've requested transfers away from the Devil's Hollow area. My supervisor thinks I developed some kind of PTSD from the Henderson incident. He's not wrong, though he's wrong about the cause. Sometimes, late at night when the fog rolls in thick, I hear voices calling from the deep forest. Not the hungry voices from the cave, but something else, something grateful. My father's voice, telling me he's proud. Cherokee voices, singing old songs of peace. And sometimes I wake up with Cherokee words on my lips, prayers I don't remember learning but somehow know by heart. Joseph Running Bear died 6 months after the incident. Natural causes, they said, though he'd seemed fine when I saw him last. At his funeral, his grandson told me the old man had said his work was finally finished. The grandson also gave me something, a small leather pouch filled with herbs and stones. Grandfather said, "You'd know when to use it," he told me. I keep it in my truck now. I don't know what it's for, exactly, but sometimes when I'm patrolling the more remote areas of the park, I feel it grow warm against my chest. When that happens, I turn around and take a different route. Last week, I got a call from a ranger up in the Blue Ridge. 3 families had gone missing near Looking Glass Rock. They'd been found eventually, alive but confused, with no memory of where they'd been for 5 days. The ranger wanted to know if we'd had similar incidents down here. If I had any advice, I told him I'd call him back. Then, I sat in my truck for a long time, feeling the weight of that medicine pouch and thinking about cycles. About hungers that don't die with the body. About curses that can jump from mountain to mountain like wildfire. The Cherokee knew these mountains long before we did. They knew what lived in the deep places, what waited in the hollows where the sun never quite reaches. They had ways of keeping the hungry things contained. But containment is not the same as destruction. And some hungers are patient enough to wait generations for their next meal. I'm 53 now. My hands shake sometimes when I'm out on patrol, especially near the limestone caves that honeycomb these mountains. I've started teaching myself Cherokee prayers, studying the old stories that I used to dismiss as superstition, because I have a feeling that what happened in Devil's Hollow was just the beginning. The mountains are full of dark places, full of things that died hungry and angry and unwilling to rest. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the fog thick enough, I can hear them calling, not to me, to each other. My name is Daniel Hutchinson, and I've been a ranger in Jefferson National Forest for 14 years. People call me Dan. I'm 38, never married, and I've given my whole life to this job. Before this, I was military police. I know how to track things, how to watch without being seen, and how to find answers when things don't make sense. I work the Mount Rogers area in Virginia. It's the highest point in the state at 5,729 feet. Up there, wild ponies run free across the meadows. Tourists love it. They come here thinking they'll see something magical. Most times, all they see are horses and pretty views. It was August 1994. Hot days, cool nights, and storms that came out of nowhere. The summer crowd was thick. Every weekend, we had dozens of people camping in the backcountry. Most of them had no idea what they were doing out there. I've always been a facts man. Military training teaches you that. You trust what you can see, touch, and prove. When people tell me they've seen something strange, I ask questions. I look for tracks. I check the evidence. There's always an explanation. The Cherokee used to hunt these mountains before white folks showed up. During the Civil War, soldiers fought and died here in the winter cold. In the 1800s and early 1900s, miners dug into these hills, looking for copper and coal. Cave-ins killed a lot of them. Their families said the mountains were angry, that the dead miners still walked the hills at sunset. Local people have stories about shadow men who hunt at twilight. Old wives' tales, I always said. People see what they expect to see when they're scared and tired. The meadows above the tree line stretch for miles. Wild ponies graze there like they have for generations. Below that, Thick rhododendron and mountain laurel make walls you can't see through. Rocky outcrops give you views for 30 miles on a clear day. Hidden valleys hold the ruins of old mining camps, rusted equipment, and broken dreams. I'm a law enforcement ranger. I handle the serious stuff in the backcountry: poaching, illegal camping, theft, assault. When Virginia State Police need help with crimes in the wilderness, they call me. I've never had an unsolved case in my area. Never. That's something I'm proud of. The other rangers joke that I could track a ghost if it left footprints. I've found lost hikers in storms, caught poachers who thought they were invisible, and solved crimes that seemed impossible. I do it by sticking to facts and working the evidence. That's why I wasn't worried when the reports started coming in during the third week of August. Ranger Hutchinson, Lisa Webb said that Tuesday morning. She's another ranger, works the visitor center. We've got 3 separate reports of people being followed on the trails. Animals? I asked. No, people. Dark figures walking behind hikers. But when they turn around, nothing's there. I set down my coffee. How far apart were these incidents? All within 2 miles of the old mining area, all between 6 and 8 p.m. I pulled out my notebook. Details matter. Tell me exactly what they saw. The first report came from a family hiking the Appalachian Trail. They said a tall, dark figure had followed them for 20 minutes, human-shaped, but wrong somehow. When they stopped, it stopped. When they moved, it moved. They finally turned around with flashlights, and it was gone. The second report was from 2 college kids camping overnight. They saw someone standing at the edge of their campfire light. Tall, maybe 6 or 7 feet. Looked like a man, but completely black. No features, no clothes they could see. Just a human-shaped shadow. It watched them for 5 minutes, then melted back into the trees. The third report bothered me most. A solo hiker, an experienced guy who'd been coming here for years. He said something had paced him on the trail for over an hour, always just outside his vision. When he'd turn his head, he'd catch a glimpse of movement. Dark, tall, keeping to the shadows between the trees. But every time he stopped and looked directly, nothing was there. Probably teenagers, I told Lisa. Kids playing pranks on tourists. But I made notes anyway. 3 incidents, 2-mile radius, all at twilight, all near the old mining area where Cooper Mine used to operate. That afternoon, I hiked up to check the sites myself. I'm good at reading sign. Footprints, broken branches, disturbed ground. I can tell you how many people passed, how fast they were moving, and whether they were carrying gear. At the first location, I found the family's tracks clear as day. Hiking boots, sneakers, a kid's smaller prints. But I couldn't find any other human tracks. Not anywhere. The ground was soft from recent rain. Anything walking there should have left marks. At the second site, same thing. The college kids' boot prints around their fire ring, but nothing else. I circled wider, checking for someone hiding in the brush. Nothing. The third location gave me my first real clue that something was wrong. The solo hiker's tracks showed a steady pace, then sudden stops. His prints got deeper at those spots, like he was turning around quick or freezing in place. But again, no other human tracks anywhere. What bothered me was the wildlife sign, or the lack of it. Usually, these trails have deer tracks, squirrel sign, bird scratches in the dirt. But in all 3 areas, I found almost nothing, like the animals were avoiding these spots. I spent the next 2 days setting up trail cameras. If kids were playing games with tourists, I'd catch them on film. I put cameras at the 3 incident sites and 2 more along the trails leading to them. Shadow people are sleep deprivation hallucinations, I told myself as I drove home that night. People get tired hiking, their minds play tricks, and they see things that aren't there. But I checked my gear twice before bed, and I made sure my radio batteries were fresh. Something was wrong in my mountains. I just didn't know what yet. Thursday morning, I checked my trail cameras. The first 2 showed nothing unusual. Deer, a few hikers, 1 family group with kids. Normal stuff? The third camera told a different story. At 7:23 p.m. the previous evening, it had captured a hiker walking past. Young woman, alone, moving at a good pace. Nothing strange about that, but at 7:24, 1 minute later, the camera showed something that made my coffee go cold. A dark shape moved across the frame behind where the woman had been walking. Tall, roughly human-shaped, but wrong. The camera's infrared should have picked up heat signatures, body warmth, something. This thing showed up as pure black. No heat at all. I stared at that image for 10 minutes. Could have been a shadow from a cloud, maybe a tree branch moving in the wind. But the image time-stamped showed clear skies, and nothing else in the frame was moving. I hiked back to that camera location with my equipment bag. Magnifying glass, measurement tools, and my Polaroid camera for documenting evidence. I needed to figure out what could create that image. The trail ran through a small clearing between pine trees. I checked the angles, looked for anything that could cast a human-shaped shadow at that time of day. Found nothing. The sun would have been too low, and the trees were in the wrong position. While I was crouched down examining the ground, I heard footsteps on the trail behind me. I turned around. Nobody there. The footsteps stopped. I waited, listening. Forest sounds, wind in the trees, birds calling, nothing else. But something felt wrong, like when you know someone's watching you, even though you can't see them. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" Silence. I went back to my work, but kept glancing over my shoulder. 20 minutes later, I heard the footsteps again, slow, deliberate, coming closer. This time, when I turned around, I saw it. At the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards away, stood a tall, dark figure, human-shaped but completely black, like a shadow that had pulled itself off the ground and started walking around. It wasn't wearing clothes as far as I could tell, just a human silhouette, dark as coal against the green forest. I blinked hard, figuring my eyes were playing tricks. When I looked again, it was still there. "Hey," I called out. "This is Forest Service property. I need to speak with you." The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, watching me. I started walking toward it, hand on my radio. "Sir, I'm a federal officer. I need you to identify yourself." The shadow figure turned and walked into the trees. Not ran, not hurried, just turned and walked away like it had all the time in the world. I followed, crashing through the underbrush. Pine branches scratched at my face and caught my uniform shirt. I could hear something moving ahead of me, but I couldn't catch up. Whatever it was moved through the thick forest like it wasn't there. After 5 minutes of chasing shadows through the woods, I stopped. My heart was pounding, and I was breathing hard. I pulled out my radio. "Dispatch. This is Ranger Hutchinson. I'm in pursuit of an unidentified individual near the Cooper Mine Trail. Request backup." Static answered me. Then, "Ranger Hutchinson, please repeat. We didn't copy your transmission." I tried again. More static. My radio worked fine everywhere else in these mountains. It should have worked fine here. I spent another hour searching the area where I'd lost the figure. No tracks, no broken branches, no sign anyone had passed through there. It was like I'd been chasing a ghost. That night, I got 2 more reports. A couple hiking late said a tall, dark figure had followed them for half a mile. They'd tried to take a picture, but their camera wouldn't work. The flash fired once, then the battery died completely. "Brand new battery," they said. A group of teenagers camping overnight reported someone standing at the edge of their firelight around 9 p.m. They threw a flashlight beam at it, and it vanished. Not walked away, not ran off. Vanished. "Equipment malfunction," I wrote in my report. "Shadows and lighting conditions causing misidentification of natural features." But I was starting to doubt my own explanations. Friday evening, I went back to the area where I'd seen the figure. This time, I brought better equipment. Night vision scope, electromagnetic field detector, and a camera with infrared film. I set up on a rocky outcrop with a clear view of the trails below. If something was stalking hikers, I'd get proof. At 6:47 p.m., I watched a solo hiker pass through the clearing below me. Middle-aged man, experienced gear, moving at a steady pace. Nothing unusual. At 6:51 p.m., I saw the shadow figure step out from behind a tree. Through the night vision scope, it looked solid enough. Definitely human-shaped, approximately 7 feet tall, moving with smooth, gliding steps. But something was wrong with how it moved. No head bobbing, no arm swing. It glided across the ground like it was floating just above the trail. The hiker below had no idea he was being followed. I grabbed my radio. Dead. Completely silent. I checked the batteries. They were fresh that morning, but now the indicator showed empty. I aimed my camera and started taking pictures. The flash fired 3 times, then stopped. The camera died. I looked down at my electromagnetic field detector. The needle was jumping wildly, way beyond anything I'd ever seen before. That's when the figure looked up at me. I couldn't see features through the scope, just darkness where a face should be. But I felt its attention like a physical weight. It knew I was there. It knew I was watching. The figure raised one arm and pointed directly at me. Then it vanished. Not walked away, not hidden behind a tree. 1 second, it was there pointing at my position. The next second, the trail was empty. I stayed on that outcrop until well after dark, but nothing else happened. The hiker below continued on his way, never knowing how close he'd come to something that shouldn't exist. Walking back to my truck, I tried to think of logical explanations. Heat mirages, atmospheric conditions, equipment failures. But I kept coming back to one simple fact. I'd seen something that had no right to exist, and it had seen me too. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. I was going to solve this case like every other case. Follow the evidence, check the facts, and find the truth. No matter how strange that truth might be. But for the first time in my career, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Saturday morning brought 3 more reports, all from different groups, all describing the same thing. Tall, dark figures watching them from the forest. But now the witnesses were describing something new. The figures seemed to be communicating with each other. There were at least 3 of them, said Tom Bradley, a hiker from Richmond. They stood at different points around our campsite, not moving, just watching. When one disappeared, the others would shift positions, like they were coordinating. Sarah Chen, camping with her boyfriend, described seeing 5 shadow figures surrounding their tent during the night. They didn't make any noise, she said, but we could feel them moving around us. Every time we shined a flashlight in one direction, they'd be somewhere else. The 3rd report came from a family with young kids. They'd cut their trip short and drove straight to the ranger station. The father, Jim Walsh, was shaking when he told me what happened. One of those things followed my 8-year-old daughter to the bathroom area, he said. She came running back screaming, said a tall shadow man was watching her, and when she looked right at it, it waved at her. I interviewed each group separately. Their stories matched too well to be made up. They described the same height, the same human shape, the same way of moving without sound. None of them had talked to each other before coming to report. We need to close this area, Lisa Webb said after the last interview. Whatever's going on up there, it's getting worse. We can't close public land based on unconfirmed reports, I told her. But I was thinking the same thing. That afternoon, I convinced Lisa to come with me on patrol. 2 rangers, full radio contact with dispatch, cameras, and recording equipment. If something was really happening up there, we'd document it properly. We hiked in around 4 p.m., planning to stay until full dark. I'd mapped out all the incident locations, and there was a pattern. Everything happened within a 2-mile circle centered on the old Cooper Mine ruins. Tell me about this mine, Lisa said as we walked. I'd been researching the history all week. Copper Mine, operated from 1890 to 1920. Had several accidents over the years, but the big one was in 1903. Cave-in trapped 12 miners. Bodies were never recovered. Why not? Secondary collapse. The whole main tunnel system came down. Too dangerous to dig them out. We reached the ruins around 5 p.m. Not much left to see. Some concrete foundations, rusted metal, and a few sealed mine entrances. The forest had grown back over most of it, but you could still see where buildings had stood. Spooky place, Lisa said. I agreed. Even in daylight, something felt wrong here. The woods were too quiet. No bird songs, no insect buzzing. Even the wind seemed muted. We set up cameras at 3 positions and started our patrol circuit. The plan was to walk the trails where people had reported sightings, documenting anything unusual. At 6:15 p.m., our radios started acting up. Static, broken transmissions, then complete silence. I checked mine 3 times. Fresh batteries, antenna intact, but no signal. That's weird, Lisa said. These radios work everywhere in the park. At 6:30, we both saw our first shadow figure. It stood beside the trail about 100 yards ahead, just watching us approach. Lisa grabbed my arm. Dan, what is that? I don't know. As we got closer, the figure became clearer. Definitely human-shaped, about 7 feet tall, dark as coal. But it had no features we could make out. No face, no clothing details, just a solid black silhouette. Hello, I called out. "Forest Service. We need to speak with you." The figure turned and walked into the trees. We followed, but lost it immediately in the thick undergrowth. "Did you see how it moved?" Lisa whispered. "Like it was floating." Over the next hour, we saw 4 more shadow figures, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. They always stayed just beyond clear sight, always melted away when we tried to approach. But they were definitely watching us, following our patrol route. At 7:45 p.m., things got personal. We were checking the area where the family had reported their encounter when Lisa suddenly stopped walking. "Dan," she said quietly, "look behind us." I turned around. 6 shadow figures stood on the trail we'd just walked, spaced out in a line, blocking our path back to the parking area. "What do they want?" Lisa's voice was tight with fear. "I don't think they want to hurt us," I said, though I wasn't sure why I believed that. "They've had plenty of chances to attack people, but they haven't." We faced the figures for maybe 2 minutes. They didn't move, didn't make any sound, just stood there like dark statues on the trail. Then, one by one, they stepped back into the trees and vanished. "We're leaving," Lisa said, "right now." But when we tried to walk back down the trail, we couldn't find it. The path we'd been following was gone. Trees and bushes blocked every direction that should have led back to our truck. "This is impossible," I said. "I know these trails like my own backyard." We spent 20 minutes searching for any way out of the area. Everything looked wrong, like the forest had rearranged itself while we weren't paying attention. Trails that should have been there were gone. New paths appeared that led nowhere. Finally, just as panic was setting in, the regular trail reappeared exactly where it should have been. We didn't run back to the truck, but we walked faster than normal. Neither of us spoke until we were driving down the mountain. "What do we put in the report?" Lisa asked. "Equipment malfunction, radio interference, potential illegal activity in the area." "You know what we really saw up there?" "I know what we think we saw. That's different." But driving home that night, I kept checking my mirrors. Something was following my truck, staying just outside the reach of my headlights. Every time I'd look directly, nothing was there, but I could feel eyes watching from the darkness beside the road. At home, I pulled out everything I could find about Cooper Mine. Newspaper articles, county records, family histories. What I found made everything worse. The 1903 cave-in hadn't been an accident. According to a report buried in the county archives, miners had been complaining for weeks before the collapse about dark watchers in the deep tunnels. They said something was down there with them, something that followed them through the mines and watched them work. The final entry in the mine supervisor's log, dated 3 days before the cave-in, said, "Men refused to work night shift. Claim shadows moving in tunnels without lantern light. Found no evidence of intruders, but losing workers daily. May have to close operation if situation continues." The cave-in had trapped 12 men in the main tunnel. According to witness statements, they'd been heard calling for help for 3 days after the collapse. Then the voices stopped. A second collapse made rescue impossible. The mine closed permanently 6 months later. Not because of safety concerns, but because no one would work there anymore. I sat up until 2 a.m. reading those old reports, and one detail kept jumping out at me. Multiple witnesses described the shadow watchers as being about 7 feet tall, human-shaped, and able to move through the mine tunnels without making sound. The same things people were seeing on the mountain trails 90 years later. Sunday morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going into Cooper Mine. The entrance had been sealed with concrete in 1920, but I'd noticed something during yesterday's patrol. Fresh air was coming from somewhere near the ruins. If the mine system was still partially accessible, that might explain where the shadow figures were coming from. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Lisa would try to stop me, and my supervisor would probably suspend me for violating safety protocols. But after what I'd seen, I needed answers. I hiked in alone with climbing gear, powerful flashlights, and a camera. Around the back of the main ruins, I found what I was looking for. A crack in the rocky hillside that hadn't been there on any old maps. Recent erosion had opened a gap that led underground. The opening was narrow, but I could squeeze through. My flashlight beam penetrated about 20 feet before the tunnel bent out of sight. Cool air flowed from the darkness, carrying a smell I couldn't identify. Old metal, damp earth, and something else, something organic. I should have waited for backup. Should have reported the find and requested a proper cave rescue team. Instead, I clipped a safety line to a tree and started down into the mountain. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle. My flashlight showed hand-carved walls and wooden support beams that were somehow still solid after 90 years. 30 feet down, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. I wasn't prepared for what I found there. The chamber was huge, maybe 40 feet across, with tunnels leading off in 3 directions. Mining equipment sat exactly where it had been left in 1903. Pickaxes, ore carts, lanterns, and lunch pails covered with decades of dust but perfectly preserved. On one wall, someone had scratched a calendar into the rock. Days marked off with increasing desperation. The last entry was the 15th of December, 1903, 12 days after the cave-in. The miners had survived underground for almost 2 weeks. I found their bodies in the deepest chamber. 12 skeletons sitting against the walls in a rough circle. They died together, probably from starvation and cold. But what made my blood freeze was how they were positioned. All 12 skulls were turned toward the center of the circle, like they'd been watching something when they died. And in the center of that circle, the rock floor was polished, smooth, and black. Not naturally black, deliberately carved into strange patterns that hurt to look at directly. That's when I realized I wasn't alone in the mine. Shadow figures stood in every tunnel entrance. More than I'd ever seen before. Dozens of them. Maybe 20 or 30, all human-shaped and dark as coal. But down here in their territory, they looked more solid, more real. I could see details that had been invisible on the surface. Mining gear, work clothes, faces that were human but wrong somehow. Like someone had tried to recreate human features from memory and gotten them slightly off. One figure stepped forward from the group, taller than the others, wearing what looked like a mine supervisor's hat. When it spoke, I heard the words inside my head rather than through my ears. "You're not supposed to be here." "Who are you?" I whispered. "We were miners once. Until we woke something up down here. Something old, something hungry." The shadow figure pointed toward the deepest tunnel where my flashlight beam couldn't penetrate. It fed on us while we were trapped. Fed on our fear, our despair, our slow death in the dark. And when we died, it kept us. Made us hunt for it. Hunt what? New food. People who come into its territory. We lead them down here, and it feeds. I understood then why the shadow figures had been following hikers. Not to attack them, but to drive them toward the mine. Toward whatever was waiting in the deep tunnels. "But you haven't brought anyone down here," I said. "You've been warning people away." The supervisor figure nodded slowly. "Some of us remember being human. Remember having families, lives outside the darkness. We've been fighting it for 90 years, trying to resist." The air in the chamber suddenly turned cold. My breath came out in white puffs, and ice crystals formed on the walls. Something was coming up from the deepest tunnel. "It knows you're here," the supervisor said. "It's hungry, and it wants you." What came out of that tunnel wasn't human and never had been. It was shadow made solid, darkness that moved with purpose and intelligence. As big as a truck, but shaped like a spider, with tendrils that reached out searching for prey. Where it touched the rock walls, they turned black and began to rot. The thing had no eyes I could see, but it focused on me immediately. I felt its attention like ice water in my veins. It had been down here for centuries, maybe longer, feeding on whatever fell into its domain. The miners had just been its most recent meal. "Run," the supervisor said. "We'll try to hold it back." The shadow miners moved between me and the creature, but they were no match for it. Its tendrils swept through them like they were made of smoke. Some of them screamed a sound like wind through broken glass that I felt in my bones. I ran for the tunnel I'd come down, but the creature was faster. A tendril wrapped around my ankle and yanked me backward. The touch burned like ice and fire at the same time. I could feel it trying to get inside my mind, searching for my fears to feed on. That's when I remembered something from my great-grandfather's papers. I'd been going through family documents after my parents died, trying to understand our family history. Found an old journal hidden in the attic that belonged to Daniel Hutchinson, Sr., my great-grandfather. Most of it was daily life stuff from the early 1900s, but there were pages about his time working at Cooper Mine. He'd written about the dark watchers in the tunnels, about miners disappearing and strange sounds in the night. And on the last page, He'd drawn symbols and written what he called Cherokee words for sending evil spirits back to the deep places. My Cherokee grandmother had taught him those words before they married, protection against things that shouldn't exist. I'd memorized those words without knowing why. Now, with an ancient evil wrapped around my leg and trying to devour my sanity, I understood. I spoke the Cherokee banishment ritual in a voice that didn't sound like my own. The creature recoiled like I'd hit it with electricity. Its grip loosened enough for me to pull free. The shadow miners suddenly became more solid, more real. They were drawing strength from the sacred words. "Keep saying them," the supervisor shouted. "It's working." I repeated the ritual, louder this time. The creature writhed and hissed, its tendrils withdrawing from the walls. Light began to emanate from the shadow miners, not bright light, but a gentle glow like moonlight. Together, we drove the ancient evil back into its deepest lair. The shadow miners formed a circle around the tunnel entrance, their light creating a barrier it couldn't cross. "It's trapped," the supervisor said, "for now. But the barrier won't hold forever. Someone needs to maintain the seal." How? Cherokee knowledge. Your great-grandfather knew but couldn't use it alone. The words need to be spoken by someone connected to this place, someone who understands both worlds. I understood. This was why my family had come to these mountains. Why my great-grandfather had worked in the mine despite the danger. Why I'd become a ranger in this exact area. 3 generations preparing for this moment. The shadow miners began to fade as the first light of dawn filtered down through the tunnel entrance. But before they disappeared completely, the supervisor spoke one last time. "Thank you. We can rest now." One by one, the trapped spirits dissolved into points of light that rose up through the rock toward the surface. After 90 years of fighting an ancient evil, they were finally free to move on. I climbed out of the mine into the morning sunshine, my head full of Cherokee words and the knowledge that some things are more important than facts and evidence. I sealed the mine entrance with concrete and steel, then had the area officially classified as geologically unstable. The paperwork made it illegal for anyone to enter the old mining area without special permits. In my official report, I wrote that environmental remediation had resolved the safety concerns in the Mount Rogers area. No mention of shadow figures or ancient evils. Just routine maintenance to protect public safety. The shadow sightings stopped completely after that day in the mine. Hikers reported that the area felt different, somehow more peaceful, less threatening. The wild ponies started grazing in meadows they'd avoided for years. Lisa Webb noticed the change too. "Whatever was bothering people up there," she said, "it's gone now. I developed abilities I'd never had before. I could sense supernatural presences, could tell when something didn't belong in the natural world. It was like my encounter with the ancient evil had opened a door in my mind that could never be completely closed." Other parks started consulting me about unusual incidents. Rangers from across Appalachia would call when they encountered things that couldn't be explained through normal channels. I became the guy you talked to when the impossible happened in your territory. My Cherokee grandmother's knowledge, passed down through my great-grandfather, became part of my ranger toolkit. I learned more about spiritual protection, about the old ways of keeping ancient evils contained. Some mountains hold things that are older than human memory, and sometimes those things wake up. I visit the sealed mine entrance once a month, checking the spiritual barriers and making sure nothing has disturbed the protective symbols I carved into the concrete. The Cherokee words still echo in my mind, ready to be spoken if needed. The local mountain families know what really happened up there, even if they don't talk about it openly. They bring me tobacco sometimes, asking me to leave it at the mine entrance as an offering for the dead miners. I always do. My supervisor commended me for resolving the situation without any civilian injuries or major incidents. My case clearance rate remains perfect. The other rangers still joke that I could track a ghost, not knowing how close to the truth they are. But late at night, when I'm alone in my cabin, I sometimes hear whispers in Cherokee drifting through the forest. Protective words, warning me about other dark places in these ancient mountains. Reminding me that my family's obligation didn't end with Cooper Mine. There are other mines in Appalachia. Other deep places where things that shouldn't exist might be stirring. And when they wake up, someone needs to be ready. My name is Daniel Hutchinson, and I'm a ranger in Jefferson National Forest. I protect these mountains from dangers most people never know exist. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I can hear the grateful whispers of 12 miners who finally found their way home. The shadow stalkers are gone, but I remain. Watching, waiting, ready to speak the old words, if darkness ever rises from the deep places again. Because some debts take generations to pay, and some knowledge is too important to let die. The mountains remember everything, and now, so do I. My name is Rachel Sullivan, but everyone calls me Ray. I've been a park ranger for 11 years now, and I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, rock slides, you name it. But I've always believed that everything has a scientific explanation. Every supernatural thing people claim to see up here, it's just geology doing what geology does. I work in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, specializing in the Seneca Rocks area. It's this massive quartzite formation that shoots up 900 feet from the valley floor like God's own skyscraper. The locals call one particular ridge Devil's Backbone, a narrow strip of rock connecting two peaks at 4,863 feet. It's technical climbing territory, the kind of place that separates the weekend warriors from the real deal. I love it up there. Got my geology degree specifically because I wanted to understand how these ancient rocks formed millions of years ago. When I became a ranger, it wasn't just about protecting the forest. It was about sharing the science behind these incredible formations. Every time some tourist asks me about the haunted mountain, I explain plate tectonics and erosion patterns. Facts, not fairy tales. The Cherokee used to consider Devil's Backbone a sacred place, somewhere they'd send young warriors for vision quests. The tribal elder, Mary Crow Dog, still lives down in the valley. Sweet old lady, but she's always warning climbers about stone spirits and ancient curses. I respect her culture, but I deal in evidence. Temperature readings, geological surveys, equipment inspections, things you can measure and prove. My fiancé Jake works here too, teaching rock climbing and leading technical rescues. We met on this crazy helicopter evacuation 3 years ago when some kid fell and broke his leg halfway up the Devil's Backbone. Jake rappelled down to stabilize him while I coordinated from the top. We worked together like we'd been partners for years. He proposed last month, right there on the summit, with the whole valley spread out below us like a green carpet. We're planning our wedding for next summer, actually having the ceremony right up on Devil's Backbone. Jake thinks I'm crazy, but I want to get married where we fell in love. Besides, I know that rock formation better than anyone. Every crack, every ledge, every route up and down. If there was anything dangerous about it beyond the normal climbing risks, I'd know. This is peak climbing season. June in West Virginia means perfect weather, long days, and climbers from all over the world coming to test themselves against our rocks. We've got an international competition scheduled for next month. Everything's been going smoothly until this week. That's when 3 experienced climbers died on what should have been an easy route. I keep telling myself there's got to be a logical explanation. Equipment failure, sudden weather change, human error, something that makes sense. But I've been climbing these rocks for over a decade, and I've never seen anything like this. The weird thing is, all 3 victims were experts, not weekend tourists or overconfident beginners, real climbers with years of experience. Tom Bradley, Sarah Chen, and Miguel Santos. I knew all of them personally. They'd climbed Devil's Backbone dozens of times before. The route they were on is called Easy Street. It's literally what we use to teach beginners. A 5.4 grade climb, which means most people could practically walk up it. These 3 could have done it blindfolded in the middle of a storm. But somehow, they all fell. At the same time, from the same section of rock they'd climbed successfully many times before. I spent the morning examining their equipment, trying to make sense of what happened. Everything was perfect. Ropes, harnesses, protection, even their helmets. No wear, no damage, no signs of failure. The gear was exactly how it should be, which made the whole thing even more confusing. Their climbing partners, 2 guys named Rick and Dave who'd been on easier routes nearby, gave me the strangest testimony I'd ever heard. They said Tom, Sarah, and Miguel had been climbing normally, talking and joking around like always. Then, about 50 feet up the rock face, all 3 of them just stopped. They started acting weird, Rick told me, his hands shaking as he sipped coffee from my thermos, just staring at the rock like they were seeing something we couldn't see. Then Sarah started screaming. Stara started screaming. What was she screaming? I asked. Something about the mountain being alive, about something moving inside the rock. Rick shook his head. These weren't beginners, Ray. Sarah's been climbing for 15 years. She doesn't spook easy. Dave nodded, looking pale. Miguel was next. He started yelling in Spanish, something about spirits in the stone. Then he just let go. Didn't even try to catch himself. Just released his hold and fell. That didn't make any sense. Climbers have this thing called a survival instinct. Even if you panic, your body automatically tries to save itself. You don't just let go of the rock face unless something's seriously wrong with your head. And Tom? I asked. Tom lasted the longest, Dave said quietly. He was trying to talk Sarah and Miguel down, telling them to focus on their holds. But then he started crying. This big, tough guy who's climbed all over the world, and he was crying like a scared kid. His last words before he fell were, "The mountain is alive and hungry." I wrote it all down, but none of it made sense. Hallucinations aren't something that just happens to experienced climbers on easy routes in perfect weather. I checked the local hospital records. No reports of bad drugs going around, no contaminated water supplies, nothing that would explain 3 people losing their minds at the same time. That afternoon, I decided to climb the route myself. Jake wasn't happy about it, but I needed to see what they might have seen. Maybe there was a gas leak from some underground source or unusual mineral deposits affecting their judgment. Something scientific. The first 40 feet felt normal. Solid quartzite, good handholds, exactly what I expected. But as I reached the section where they died, something felt different. It started as a weird vibration through the rock. Not an earthquake. I've felt plenty of those. This was more like a pulse, almost like a heartbeat coming from deep inside the mountain. I checked my hands, wondering if I was imagining it, but the vibration was definitely there. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually, like a cloud passing over the sun. Instantly, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath started misting, even though it was 70 degrees at the base of the cliff. Ice actually began forming on the metal hardware of my climbing gear. That's when I heard the voices. They were speaking Cherokee. I'd heard enough from Mary Crow Dog over the years to recognize the language. The words seemed to come from inside the rock itself, like the stone was whispering. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but the tone was angry, warning, threatening. I looked down to signal Jake, but he was too far away to hear me over the wind that had suddenly picked up. When I looked back at the rock face, something made my blood freeze. There were handprints pressed into the stone. Not carved, pressed, like someone had pushed their hands into soft clay, except this was solid quartzite that had been here for millions of years. The prints were still warm when I touched them. I rappelled down fast, my heart hammering. Jake could tell something was wrong the moment I hit the ground. "What happened up there?" he asked. "You look like you saw a ghost." I almost laughed at that. Ghost would have been easier to explain than what I'd actually experienced. But I'm a scientist. There had to be a logical reason for everything I'd felt and seen. Probably just the stress of the investigation, I told him. Let me check the geological surveys, see if there's been any recent seismic activity. But deep down, I was starting to wonder if Mary Crow Dog might not be as crazy as I'd always thought. The next few days brought more climbers and more problems. Word was spreading through the climbing community about the 3 deaths. But instead of scaring people away, it was attracting the thrill seekers, the kind of climbers who think danger makes things more exciting. I tried to warn them off Devil's Backbone, suggesting other routes in the area, but they wouldn't listen. "Come on, Ray," one of them said. "You don't actually believe in ghosts, do you? You're a scientist." I wanted to agree with him. I wanted to go back to my nice, logical world, where rocks were just rocks and everything had a reasonable explanation. But then Jake started having the dreams. He woke me up the 3rd night, thrashing around and mumbling in his sleep. When I shook him awake, his eyes were wide and terrified. "I was climbing," he said, his voice shaky. "But the mountain, Ray, the mountain was breathing. I could feel it expanding and contracting under my hands. And there were people inside it, trapped in the stone, trying to claw their way out. Jake's not the type to have nightmares. He's steady as a rock, the guy who stays calm when everyone else is panicking. Seeing him scared made my own fear worse. I spent the morning researching the area's history, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. That's when I found the old geological survey from 1896, buried in the state archives. The survey team had been led by a man named Dr. Edwin Hartwell, mapping the quartzite formations for mining potential. His notes started normal enough: measurements, rock samples, elevation readings. But as the survey progressed, his handwriting became erratic, his observations stranger. "The mountain responds to our presence," one entry read. "The stone formations seem to shift when we're not looking directly at them." Team members report feeling watched. The final entry, dated just before Hartwell disappeared, was barely legible. "The Cherokee were right. This place is alive. It's testing us, judging us. I can hear it thinking. God help me, I can hear it thinking." They found Hartwell's body 3 weeks later. According to the report, he'd somehow fallen into a crack in the rock face that was too narrow for a human body. But there he was, squeezed into the stone like it had opened up to swallow him and then closed again. That afternoon, another climber went missing. Lisa Park, a professional guide from Colorado with 20 years of experience. She'd gone up Devil's Backbone alone, which was against regulations, but guides sometimes bent the rules. Her climbing partner found her gear at the base of the cliff: helmet, ropes, everything neatly arranged in a circle on the ground. But no Lisa. We searched for 3 days. Helicopters, rescue teams, dogs, the full treatment. Finally found her on a ledge halfway up the north face, a section of rock that's completely unclimbable without technical gear. She was unconscious, dehydrated, but alive. When she woke up in the hospital, her story made no sense. "I was climbing normally," she told me, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes. "Then suddenly, I wasn't on Devil's Backbone anymore. I was inside the mountain, in this huge cavern filled with people. All the climbers who'd died over the years, just standing there, staring at me. They told me I had to choose: join them permanently or leave and never come back." "How did you get to that ledge?" I asked. Lisa looked at me like I was crazy. "What ledge?" "I woke up right where I started climbing. You found me at the base of the cliff." But that wasn't true. We had photos, GPS coordinates, witness statements. She'd been on that impossible ledge, 50 feet up, an unclimbable rock face, with no memory of how she got there. Jake and I were driving back from the hospital when he pulled over suddenly. "Ray, look at the mountain." I followed his gaze toward Devil's Backbone. In the late afternoon light, the quartzite formation looked different. The shadows on the rock face formed patterns that looked almost like faces, dozens of them, watching us from the stone. "It's just pareidolia," I said, my voice not as steady as I wanted. "The human brain sees faces in random patterns. It's perfectly normal." But even as I said it, I knew the faces weren't random. They were moving, shifting, following us with their eyes as we drove away. That night, Jake didn't come to bed. I found him sitting on our porch, staring up at Devil's Backbone in the moonlight. "Mary Crow Dog was right," he said quietly. "The mountain is alive. And it's hungry." I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces in the rock, heard the whispered Cherokee voices, felt that strange heartbeat pulse through the stone. Finally, around dawn, I made a decision that probably saved my life, or maybe doomed it. I went to see Mary Crow Dog. She lived in a small cabin at the base of the valley, surrounded by herb gardens and wind chimes that sang constantly in the mountain breeze. When I knocked on her door, she opened it like she'd been expecting me. "You finally ready to listen, Ray Sullivan?" she asked, gesturing for me to come inside. Her living room was filled with Cherokee artifacts, pottery, weavings, photographs of tribal ceremonies. But what caught my attention was the collection of newspaper clippings and photographs covering one entire wall. All climbing accidents on Devil's Backbone, going back decades. 37 people, Mary said, following my gaze. 37 people who came to test themselves against a sacred mountain and failed the test. "What test?" I asked. Mary poured 2 cups of coffee and settled into a rocking chair that looked older than the forest itself. In the old days, Cherokee warriors would climb the Devil's Backbone as a vision quest. The mountain spirits would test their courage, their wisdom, their respect for the sacred world. Those who passed became great leaders. Those who failed, she gestured toward the wall of photographs. But that was when we understood the rules. Mary continued. When we came with prayer and ceremony, with respect for the spirits who guard that place, white men come with ropes and metal gear, treating the sacred mountain like a playground. The spirits don't like being ignored. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. You're saying the mountain is actually alive. Not alive like you and me. Alive like the earth itself is alive, with its own spirit, its own purpose. Devil's Backbone has been a testing ground for over 1,000 years. The spirits of all those who failed the test still live in the rock, and they're the ones doing the judging now. Mary stood up and pulled an old leather journal from a wooden chest. Dr. Hartwell understood. At the end, he left this with my grandfather before he went back to the mountain for the last time. I opened the journal with trembling fingers. Hartwell's final entries described exactly what I'd been experiencing: the voices, the handprints, the sensation of the rock being alive. But his last entry was different from the official report I'd read. I understand now, he'd written. The mountain isn't evil, it's protective. It's trying to preserve something sacred from people who don't understand what they're dealing with. The spirits offer a choice: respect the sacred nature of this place, or join them as guardians forever. I choose to become a guardian. Someone needs to protect this place from people like me. So he went back voluntarily? I asked. Mary nodded. And he's still there, trying to warn people. Just like all the others who failed the test but found wisdom too late. That's when I realized what I had to do. I need to climb Devil's Backbone, I said. Not as a scientist or a ranger, but the way your people did it. As a spiritual test. Mary studied my face for a long moment. It's dangerous, Ray. The spirits have been angry for many years. They might not be willing to listen. People are dying, I said. And more will die if this continues. I have to try to make peace between the climbing community and the mountain spirits. You can't do it alone, Mary said. The test requires witnesses, people who care about the outcome. Your young man, he'll need to come too. That evening, I explained everything to Jake. I expected him to think I'd lost my mind, to try to talk me out of it. Instead, he just nodded. I've been feeling it too, he said. The mountain's been calling to me in my dreams, I think. I think it wants us both to come. We spent 2 days preparing with Mary's help. No modern climbing gear, just traditional methods. Leather ropes, wooden tools, prayers, and ceremonies to show respect. Mary taught us Cherokee words for asking permission, for showing humility, for promising to protect the sacred place. On the morning of the summer solstice, we began our climb. The climb started before dawn, with Mary Crow Dog singing traditional prayers at the base of Devil's Backbone. The mountain felt different this time. Not hostile, but watchful. Like it was deciding whether we were worthy of its attention. Jake and I climbed together, using the old techniques Mary had taught us. No metal hardware, no high-tech gear, just rope and wood and faith. About halfway up, the spirits began to test us. The rock face started changing. Handholds appeared and disappeared, forcing us to trust our instincts rather than our technical training. The Cherokee voices returned, but this time they weren't threatening. They were guiding, showing us the safe path up the sacred mountain. Near the summit, we encountered them directly. The spirits of Cherokee warriors materialized on ledges around us, translucent but clearly visible in the morning light. Behind them stood the climbers who'd died over the decades, not as victims, but as guardians who'd found their purpose in protecting the sacred site. Dr. Hartwell appeared last, his Victorian-era climbing clothes strange among the ancient Cherokee spirits. He spoke directly to me, his voice echoing strangely in the thin air. "You understand now," he said. "This place isn't meant to be conquered, it's meant to be respected. The spirits will allow climbing, but only by those who approach with proper humility and knowledge of what they're dealing with." "What do we need to do?" I asked. "Become the bridge," Hartwell replied. "Teach climbers the old ways alongside the new techniques. Show them that Devil's Backbone isn't just rock, it's a living sacred site that demands respect." Jake and I completed the climb as the sun reached its peak. On the summit, surrounded by the spirits of warriors and climbers, we spoke our wedding vows with Mary Crow Dog, officiating from far below via radio. It wasn't the ceremony we'd planned, but it felt right, joining ourselves not just to each other, but to the responsibility of protecting this sacred place. The spirits gave us their blessing and their warning. Climbers could continue to use Devil's Backbone, but only those who learned the proper protocols. prayer before climbing, respect for the sacred nature of the site, and always asking permission from the mountain spirits. Word spread quickly through the climbing community. Some people thought we'd gone crazy, but others were intrigued by the combination of traditional Cherokee spirituality and modern climbing techniques. The international competition went ahead as planned, but with new rules. Every climber had to spend time with Cherokee elders, learning the cultural significance of the mountain before attempting any routes. The deaths stopped. That was 5 years ago. Jake and I now run a climbing school that teaches both technical skills and spiritual respect for the mountains. We've helped establish similar programs at other sacred climbing sites around the world, working with indigenous communities to preserve traditional knowledge while keeping the mountains accessible to respectful visitors. Devil's Backbone still tests climbers, but the tests are different now. The mountain spirits seem satisfied with the new arrangement. They protect those who show proper respect and gently discourage those who don't. We've had a few incidents of equipment mysteriously malfunctioning for disrespectful climbers, but no more deaths. I still approach everything from a scientific perspective, but now I understand that science doesn't have all the answers. Some things exist in the spaces between what we can measure and what we know to be true. The mountain is still alive, still watching, still testing those who dare to climb its sacred spine. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist rises from the valley below, you can see them. The Cherokee warriors and the guardian spirits of climbers past, keeping their eternal watch over Devil's Backbone, making sure that no one forgets the mountain demands respect as well as courage. The quartzite formation still rises 900 feet above the valley floor, ancient and patient, and very much alive. And I'm still there too, along with Jake and Mary Crow Dog and all the others who learned to listen to what the mountain was trying to tell us. Some places are too sacred to conquer, but if you approach them with humility and respect, they might just allow you to become part of their story. My name is Kate Morrison, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. I work in the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky, where the mountains are old and the people still tell stories about things that happened long ago. I don't believe in those stories. Witches, ghosts, curses, all that stuff is just nonsense. People make up scary tales when they can't explain what really happened. I have a psychology degree, and I know how the human mind works. Fear makes people see things that aren't there. That's what I believed until 3 college girls disappeared near a place the locals call Witch's Ridge. It was October 1991, and the leaves were turning red and gold. Perfect hiking weather, except these 3 girls, Jessica, Amanda, and Sarah, never came home from their camping trip. Their families called us when they didn't show up at school on Monday morning. I found their campsite on Tuesday. Everything was wrong about it. Their backpacks were arranged in a perfect circle with their personal things, books, hairbrushes, a radio placed between them in careful patterns. Someone had drawn strange symbols in the dirt with a stick, stars and circles and lines that looked like they might mean something important. But there were no signs of trouble. No scattered gear, no half-eaten food, no footprints leading away. It was like 3 people had just decided to vanish into thin air. "Maybe they just walked off into the woods," said Deputy Harris from the state police. "Young folks do stupid things sometimes." I nodded, but I knew he was wrong. These girls had been careful, organized campers. They wouldn't just wander off and leave all their gear behind. That night, I made my first mistake. Instead of going home, I decided to camp near their site. Professional reasons, I told myself. In case they came back? Really, I think I just didn't want to face my empty house. My ex-husband was trying to take custody of my 15-year-old daughter Ashley, saying that a woman who lived alone in the woods wasn't a fit mother. Maybe he was right. I set up my tent and tried to sleep. That's when the dreams started. I dreamed about a woman in old-fashioned clothes, long skirt, white shirt, hair pinned up like they wore it 100 years ago. She was teaching me about plants, showing me which ones could heal fever and which ones could ease pain. "The old ways aren't lost," she said in the dream. "They're just waiting for the right students." I woke up knowing things I'd never learned. I could look at the plants around my campsite and somehow know what they were good for. Willow bark for fever, echinacea for fighting sickness. Other plants with names and uses that filled my head like someone had downloaded information directly into my brain. The strangest part was finding a piece of paper in my notebook that I didn't remember writing. It was a recipe for tea that would calm the mind and open the spirit, written in handwriting that looked like mine but somehow wasn't. I told myself it was stress. The missing girls, the custody battle, too many nights sleeping outside instead of in a real bed. People's minds play tricks when they're tired and worried. But as I packed up that morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the trees. Someone who wanted to teach me things I wasn't sure I wanted to learn. The second day brought more problems and no answers. Our helicopter pilot reported weird electrical problems over a certain part of the ridge. His compass spun like a carnival ride, and his radio filled with static. 20 years of flying, and he'd never seen anything like it. The search dogs wouldn't track past a certain point. They'd follow the scent for about 100 yards, then just sit down and refuse to go any farther. The handlers said they'd never seen their dogs act like that. By afternoon, I was running out of normal search methods. Time to ask the locals, the families who'd lived in these mountains for generations and knew every ridge and hollow. Mrs. Eleanor Hutchins was 83 and sharp as a knife. Her family had lived in the same cabin since before the Civil War. Those girls came by here 3 days ago, she told me over coffee, that could strip paint, asking about Sarah McBride, wanting to know where she was buried. Who's Sarah McBride? Woman they hanged back in 1847 for being a witch. Except she wasn't really a witch, she was a healer. Helped women when the doctors were too far away or too expensive, but she taught things that scared the men in town. Mrs. Hutchins rocked on her porch, looking out at the ridge. Sarah knew how to prevent babies when you already had too many mouths to feed. How to ease pain during childbirth. How to make a man think twice before hitting his wife. Things that gave women power when women weren't supposed to have any. What does that have to do with 3 missing college students? Maybe they found something worth staying for, she said, and wouldn't say anything else. That evening, I hiked to the area where the helicopter had problems. It was a natural clearing surrounded by cliffs, with plants growing there that had no business surviving in Kentucky. Herbs I somehow recognized from my dream, growing thick and healthy, like someone was tending them. My radio filled with static when I tried to call in. My GPS gave me 3 different readings, all wrong. My watch stopped working. That's when I heard singing. A woman's voice, faint but clear, carrying a melody I didn't know but somehow felt familiar. Like a song your grandmother might have hummed while working in her garden, if your grandmother had lived 100 years ago. I followed the sound to a gap in the rocks that led into a cave. The singing was coming from inside, echoing off stone walls in a way that made it impossible to tell how far back the cave went. "Hello?" I called. "This is Park Ranger Morrison. Is anyone in there?" The singing stopped immediately. I pulled out my flashlight and squeezed through the gap. The space beyond opened into a larger room with smooth walls and something that made my blood freeze. Fresh flowers. Dozens of them. Arranged in careful patterns around what looked like a natural stone altar. Flowers that shouldn't have been blooming this late in the year, arranged like someone had just placed them there. And in the center of it all, 3 familiar backpacks. I backed out so fast I scraped my shoulder on the rock. Every instinct told me to run, but I was a professional. Professionals don't run from flower arrangements. I tried to radio for backup, but the transmission was nothing but static. As I waited at the cave entrance, watching shadows grow longer, that's when I saw her. A woman stepped out from behind a boulder 30 feet away. She wore the same old-fashioned clothes from my dream-long skirt, white shirt, dark hair pinned up. She moved without making any sound on the fallen leaves. "You found them," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. I wondered when someone would come looking. "Ma'am, I'm Park Ranger Morrison. Are you Sarah McBride?" She smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. I was, once. Now I'm something else. Something that teaches and learns and remembers. Where are the 3 women? Safe, learning, choosing. She moved closer, and I noticed her feet made no sound at all. "Just as you will choose, Catherine Morrison." "Choose what?" "Whether to keep what you've already started learning or go back to your small, safe life." The rational part of my mind was screaming that none of this made sense. People don't dress like they're from the 1800s unless they're crazy. Women don't appear and disappear in national forests without leaving tracks. Dead people stay dead. But the part of me that had been growing stronger since the dream recognized her immediately. "You're supposed to be dead," I said. They hanged you in 1847. Death is just another kind of learning, she replied, and some lessons are too important to let die. She gestured toward the cave. Your students are waiting. They've been hoping you would find them. Students? The 3 young women who came looking for the old ways. They've been learning what I have to teach. But their families worry, and search parties come. It's time for them to choose, stay, and learn everything, or return to the world with enough knowledge to plant new seeds. I stared at the cave entrance, then back at the woman who claimed to be a ghost. And if I go in there, then you'll understand what those symbols really meant. You'll understand why your daughter is drawn to books about herbs and healing. You'll understand what you've been searching for in these mountains all these years. The sun was setting, painting everything red and gold. In that light, she looked more real, more solid. And I realized I could smell her lavender and smoke, and something green and growing. You're afraid, she said gently. Good. Fear keeps you honest. But don't let it keep you from learning. She walked toward the cave, moving with that same silent grace. At the entrance, she turned back. Come when you're ready, Catherine. They're waiting. They have so much to teach. Then she was gone. Not disappeared dramatically, just not there anymore, like a scent fading or a sound dying away. I stood alone as darkness fell, staring at the cave entrance and trying to decide if I was losing my mind or finding something I'd been looking for without knowing it. Curiosity won. It always does with me. I turned on my flashlight and walked into the cave. The cave was much larger inside than it looked from outside, with passages leading off in different directions like the roots of a huge tree. My flashlight showed smooth walls covered with symbols like the ones at the campsite, but older, carved deep into the stone as if they'd been there for decades. I followed the main passage toward a faint light that grew stronger as I went deeper. The air smelled of herbs and candle smoke, and I could hear voices ahead, young women talking quietly, the way students do when they're excited about learning something new. The passage opened into a room about the size of a classroom. The walls were lined with shelves carved right from the rock, holding jars of plants, handwritten books, and other things I couldn't identify. 3 women sat in a circle near the center, surrounded by candles. They looked up as I entered, and I recognized them from the family photos: Jessica, Amanda, and Sarah. They looked healthy and alert, but there was something different about them. A calmness that hadn't been in their pictures. Ranger Morrison, Jessica said, standing up. We've been waiting for you. Sarah said you'd find us eventually. Your families are worried sick, I said automatically, though being in that room felt like stepping into a different world where normal concerns seemed far away. We've had search teams looking for you for 2 days. We know, Amanda said. We heard the helicopters. But we needed time to learn what was being offered. What's being offered? The student named Sarah gestured at the shelves around us. Knowledge that's been saved for over a century. Healing techniques that modern medicine forgot. Understanding of how plants and the human body connect. I moved closer to look at the books. They were handwritten, bound in leather that looked old but well kept. I opened one and found detailed drawings of plants with notes about their healing properties. She's been teaching us, Jessica continued, things they don't teach in medical school. How to read a person's health by looking at their skin, their eyes, how they move. How to make medicines that actually cure instead of just treating symptoms. Who's teaching you? Sarah McBride? All 3 said at the same time. As if her name summoned her, the woman from the clearing appeared near the entrance. In the candlelight, she looked almost normal except for her old-fashioned clothes and the way she moved without disturbing the air around her. Catherine, she said warmly, I'm glad you came. I'm here to take these women back to their families. Of course, that's what any good person would do. Sarah moved among the candles like they were important instruments. But first, let me show you what they've learned. Jessica picked up a small jar from the shelves. This is made from willow bark and other plants that grow wild here. It can bring down a fever faster than any drugstore medicine, with no bad side effects. People have known about willow bark for a long time, I said. But do they know how to mix it with other plants to treat breathing problems? Or how to prepare it so it doesn't upset your stomach? Or when to harvest it for the strongest medicine? Jessica opened the jar and let me smell it. The scent was sharp and clean, somehow more intense than I would have expected. Show her the other thing, Amanda said quietly. Jessica held out her hands, palms up, and I saw they were glowing with a soft blue light. Not like a metaphor actually giving off light, like those fish that glow in the deep ocean. It doesn't hurt to touch, she said. Against every logical thought in my head, I reached out and touched her palm. Immediately, warmth spread up my arm, bringing a feeling of deep calm and well-being. A headache I'd been carrying for 3 days just vanished. How? I whispered. The human body makes electrical fields, Sarah McBride explained. Most people can't use that energy on purpose, but it can be learned. Used for healing. She stood beside me, and I felt the same warmth radiating from her. This is what they feared in 1847. Not witchcraft, but knowledge. Not evil, but power they couldn't control. I pulled my hand away, but the good feeling remained. This is impossible. So is your radio working perfectly in here when it won't work at all outside? Amanda pointed out. She was right. I could hear clear chatter from the command post through my radio. So is the fact that you've been dreaming about plant medicine for 2 nights, Sarah added. So is your daughter's sudden interest in the same things that brought these women here. My blood went cold. What does Ashley have to do with this? She's been researching the same things they were. Reading the same books, visiting the same websites, asking the same questions. She's drawn to this knowledge just like you are. Sarah's eyes showed compassion mixed with something like urgency. The gift often runs in families, Catherine. Your daughter could be a powerful healer, but without proper guidance, that power can be dangerous. I thought about Ashley's recent changes. Her new interest in crystals and herbs, her secret phone calls, her requests to visit me, her growing distance from her father, and her insistence that she wanted to live with me full-time. What are you offering? I asked. Training. For all of you, these 3 have learned the basics, but there's so much more. Ways to diagnose illness that work better than medical tests. Treatments that can cure things modern medicine considers impossible. She gestured at the shelves of books and supplies. This knowledge has been preserved for over a century, added to by every woman trained here. It's not superstition. It's science that works on principles your modern world forgot. What's the cost? Time, commitment, the courage to let go of old ideas about what's possible. Sarah's face grew serious. And accepting that once you truly understand what's offered, you can never see the world the same way again. I looked at the 3 students, all watching me with the intensity of people who'd made a life-changing discovery. What about your families, your educations, your normal lives? We're going back, Jessica said, but we're taking this knowledge with us. We'll finish school, but we'll also practice what we learned here, quietly, carefully, helping people when we can. And someday, we'll train others, Sarah added. The way we've been trained, the way you could train your daughter, if you choose to learn. Sarah McBride moved to stand in front of me, and the temperature in the room seemed to rise. The air itself felt thick with possibility. I'm offering you a choice, Catherine Morrison. Learn what these women learned, take that knowledge back to your world, and help preserve it for the next generation. Or, forget this ever happened, and go back to the life you've been living. And if I choose to learn, then your training begins now, tonight. Because time is running short. Running short how? Your ex-husband is driving up from Lexington with a court order and a psychiatrist. He plans to have you declared mentally incompetent based on reports of your strange behavior during this search. Sarah's expression was grim. If he succeeds, you'll lose custody of your daughter permanently. My stomach dropped. How do you know that? I know many things, including that your daughter ran away from her father's house 3 hours ago, leaving a note saying she was coming to find you. My radio crackled with static, then cleared long enough for me to hear Deputy Harris requesting contact with all teams. We have a new missing person, his voice said. 15-year-old female. She took her father's hunting knife, Jessica said quietly. She's scared and angry, and heading into these mountains in the dark, looking for you. She has no wilderness training, and no idea what she's walking into. Sarah McBride's expression was urgent now. This is why I brought you here tonight, Catherine. Not just to rescue these 3, but to prepare for what's coming. Your daughter needs protection, and the only way to protect her is to understand the forces drawing her here. What forces? The same ones that brought you here. The knowledge calls to those who need it, and your daughter needs it more than most. I stared at the radio, then at the 3 women watching me. How long do I have? To find her? Hours if she stays on trails, minutes if she doesn't. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. To learn what you need to protect her? That depends on how fast you can accept what's possible. I looked around the chamber one more time at the impossible books, the glowing students, the spirit of a woman dead for 150 years. Then I made the only choice that made sense. Teach me, I said. The training began immediately and was unlike anything I could have imagined. Sarah placed her hands on my shoulders, and suddenly I could feel energy flowing through the chamber like an invisible river. Close your eyes and reach out with your senses, she instructed. Feel for your daughter's presence in the forest. It should have been impossible. Ashley was somewhere in hundreds of square miles of wilderness. But as I relaxed into the strange warmth radiating from the cave walls, I began to sense something. A bright spot of fear and determination, moving through the darkness about 2 miles northeast of us. Stumbling over roots and rocks, crying but refusing to give up, calling my name into the wind. She's on the old logging road from Highway 77, I said, opening my eyes in amazement. But she's going the wrong way. She'll hit the cliff face in half a mile. Can you reach her in the dark? Jessica asked. Not fast enough. It'll take me an hour to hike there, and she could fall into any number of ravines before then. Then we'll have to guide her here, Sarah said, using methods your ranger manual doesn't cover. She moved to a wall section I hadn't examined closely. Carved into the stone was a detailed map of the area, showing not just official trails but dozens of paths I'd never seen on any Forest Service chart. It marked caves, water sources, shelters, and other features with symbols that somehow made immediate sense to me. This is how mountain families navigated these ridges for generations, Sarah explained. Before GPS, before official trail markers. Your daughter is here. She pointed to a spot on the map. She needs to be here. Another point, much closer to our cave. How do we guide her? She doesn't have a radio. The same way mountain people have guided lost travelers for centuries. Sarah retrieved what looked like a large conch shell from the shelves. Sound carries in these mountains, if you know how to use it. The shell was warm and felt heavier than it should. Call to her. Not with words, but with intention. Think about safety, about coming home, about the path she needs to take. The sound will carry those thoughts. I held the shell uncertainly. This is crazy. Your daughter is stumbling through dark woods with a knife, looking for her mother who's been declared mentally unstable, Amanda pointed out. I think we passed crazy a while ago. I put the shell to my lips and blew, thinking as hard as I could about Ashley finding safety. The sound that came out was unlike anything I'd ever heard, deep and melodic, carrying undertones that seemed to speak to the heart rather than the ears. The sound echoed through the cave and out into the night, somehow amplified until it felt like the entire ridge was singing. Through my radio, I could hear search teams asking each other about horns or whistles, but their confusion seemed faint and distant. Again, Sarah said, keep calling until she responds. I blew the shell 3 more times, each note carrying my desperate love and fear for my daughter. On the 4th call, I heard an answer, a faint whistle from the northeast, the emergency signal I'd taught Ashley years ago. She heard it, I said, relief flooding through me. She's responding. Good, now guide her closer. Use the shell to lead her along the safe path. For the next hour, I called Ashley through the darkness, using sounds that shouldn't have worked but did. Each time I blew the shell, she answered with her whistle, and gradually the bright spot I sensed in the forest moved closer. But as she approached, I became aware of other presences in the woods, dark ones that felt angry and hungry, moving toward our calls. There's something else out there, I said. Something that doesn't like what we're doing. Sarah's face grew grim. The old knowledge has enemies, Catherine. Forces that profit from keeping people sick, weak, and dependent. They don't often take physical form, but when they do, through the radio chatter, I heard reports of equipment failures, search teams getting lost on familiar trails, and team members becoming violently ill for no reason. They're trying to stop the search, I realized. They want Ashley lost in the woods. They want all of you neutralized, Sarah corrected. You, your daughter, and the knowledge you're learning. If you're declared incompetent and Ashley disappears, who's going to believe any of this happened? The 3 students were packing their things, moving with urgent efficiency. We need to get back to civilization, Jessica said. If we're found here, it confirms every theory about cult activity. But Ashley, "We'll be fine if you can get her to the cave," Sarah interrupted. "The protections here are strong, but once she arrives, you'll have minutes to make your final choice." "What choice?" "Whether to take the knowledge and run, or stay and fight for the right to practice it openly." Ashley's whistle was much closer now, probably less than a quarter-mile away. But I could also hear other sounds, branches breaking, rocks falling, and something that might have been growling. "If we run, we'll always be running," I said. "They'll never let us use what we've learned. If you stay and fight, you might lose everything," Sarah warned. "Including your daughter." I thought about 13 years of helping lost people in the wilderness. About the custody battle, the court psychiatrist, the endless compromises I'd made to fit other people's ideas of who I should be. "Then it's time to stop running." Ashley's voice echoed through the cave entrance, calling my name. I ran toward the sound and found my daughter silhouetted against the opening, with tears streaming down her face. "Mom," she cried, running into my arms. "I was so scared you were lost." "I was," I said, holding her tight, "but I'm not anymore." As I hugged my daughter, I could feel the knowledge Sarah had given me, settling into my mind like puzzle pieces clicking into place. I understood now why Ashley had been drawn to books about herbs and healing. I understood why I'd become a ranger, and why these mountains had always felt like home. "Mom, there are things moving in the woods," Ashley whispered. "Things that don't sound like animals." "I know, sweetheart, but we're safe now." Behind us, Sarah McBride appeared, more solid and real than ever. "Catherine Morrison," she said formally, "do you accept the responsibility of preserving and protecting the old knowledge?" I looked at my daughter, then at the 3 young women who'd risked everything to learn forgotten healing arts, then at the spirit of a woman who died protecting the same knowledge 150 years ago. "I do," I said. The moment I spoke those words, the cave filled with light, not from candles or flashlights, but from Sarah herself and from the symbols carved into the walls. Power flowed through the chamber like electricity, and I felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of what was possible. "Then let's go save your colleagues," Sarah said with a fierce smile. "Time to show those dark forces what happens when they threaten a mother's child." The confrontation was brief but decisive. As we emerged from the cave, we found the forest in chaos. Search teams were scattered and confused, their equipment failing and radios filled with static. Several rangers were down with sudden illnesses, and the helicopter pilot reported engine problems that made no sense mechanically. But now I could see what was causing the problems: dark shapes moving through the trees, formless but malevolent, feeding off fear and confusion. They recoiled when Sarah's light touched them, making sounds that fortunately only we could hear. "Stay close to me," I told Ashley, and together we moved through the forest like we belonged there. I guided lost search teams back to trails, using knowledge I'd gained in a single night, treating their mysterious illnesses with herbs. I gathered along the way, and somehow my radio worked perfectly while everyone else's remained full of static. By dawn, the crisis was over. The 3 missing students were found near their original campsite with a story about getting lost in cave systems and sleeping there for safety. Ashley and I were discovered together, having spent the night searching along creek beds, according to my official report. The dark forces retreated with the sunrise, but I knew they'd be back. The knowledge had enemies, and those enemies would never stop trying to suppress it. But they'd also never completely succeed. 2 weeks later, the custody hearing went better than expected. Ashley testified that she wanted to live with me, and somehow the judge seemed more receptive to her arguments than anyone had anticipated. My ex-husband's psychiatrist found me completely competent and recommended that current custody arrangements remain in place. I returned to regular ranger duties with a new understanding of my role. Officially, I helped lost hikers and enforced forest regulations. Unofficially, I served as a bridge between the official world and older ways that still survived in these mountains. The 3 students went back to their universities and continued their education, but they also began practicing what they'd learned. Jessica started a holistic health clinic after medical school. Amanda opened an art therapy practice that used traditional healing techniques. The younger Sarah became a philosophy professor, specializing in indigenous wisdom traditions. Ashley thrived in the mountains. She learned botany and wilderness survival, but she also learned to identify medicinal plants and to read subtle signs that indicated when someone needed healing. By high school graduation, she could calm a panicked hiker with a touch, and find lost campers using senses most people didn't know they had. The cave where we'd met Sarah McBride was never officially mapped, though I visited regularly. Sometimes Sarah was there to answer questions. Sometimes it was empty, except for carved symbols and shelves of preserved knowledge. But it was never truly empty. The knowledge lived there, waiting for the next generation who would need it. 5 years later, I was promoted to Chief Ranger for the Red River Gorge area. The position gave me authority to quietly support traditional healing practices among mountain communities. Officially, I ran wilderness education programs and coordinated rescues. Unofficially, I trained a network of rangers, local healers, and volunteers who understood that some problems required solutions not covered in any government manual. Ashley went to college but spent every summer working as a wilderness guide. She specialized in helping visitors drawn to the area for spiritual reasons, the ones who sensed these mountains held secrets worth discovering. Sometimes, when the moon was dark and tourist season was over, she would lead small groups of carefully selected women to a cave that didn't appear on any official map. There, they would learn techniques that modern medicine had forgotten, guided by the spirit of a woman who'd refused to let valuable knowledge die with her. The network grew slowly and quietly. Jessica's clinic became a training center. Amanda's practice connected with similar programs throughout Appalachia. Sarah's courses attracted students from around the world researching traditional wisdom. And in the Daniel Boone National Forest, rangers continued to help lost hikers find their way home, using methods that worked whether or not anyone could explain why. The darkness that had opposed us never fully disappeared, but it learned to be more cautious. Every few years, there would be another incident: equipment failures during important rescues, sudden illnesses among rangers who asked too many questions, political pressure to limit access to certain forest areas. But the knowledge persisted, protected by people who understood its value and were willing to pay the price for preserving it. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm patrolling the ridge alone, I still hear Sarah McBride's voice carried on the wind. Usually, she's singing the same melody I heard that first night. It's a song about teaching and learning, about knowledge that refuses to die, and about women brave enough to preserve wisdom for future generations. Ashley knows the song now too. She'll teach it to her own daughter someday, along with other lessons that can't be found in any textbook. The Witch's Ridge isn't a place of fear anymore. It's a place of learning, where old ways are preserved and new students are always welcome. And somewhere in the darkness between the trees, Sarah McBride continues to teach, waiting patiently for the next person who needs to discover that some knowledge is worth any price to preserve.